Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world where the flip of a switch means absolutely nothing, where the hum of refrigerators and the glow of screens haven't been invented yet, and where the darkness, real, thick, enveloping darkness, is something you live inside rather than something you banish with a casual flick of your finger. You're about to spend a night, a day, an entire lifetime in 1800s America, and let me tell you, you probably wouldn't survive your first week. Not because you're soft. Okay, maybe a little because you're soft, but because everything you take for granted, from the light you're using to watch this video to the clean water you sipped 5 minutes ago, required back-breaking labour, careful planning, and a level of daily endurance that would make your gym routine look like a gentle warm-up. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. I love knowing that someone in Tokyo is drifting off while someone in Texas is just settling into bed. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, and there's nothing. Not the faint glow of a charging phone, not the distant streetlight bleeding through curtains, not even the tiny red dot of a smoke detector. Just darkness so complete it feels like a physical presence, like velvet pressed against your face. For a moment, you wonder if you've gone blind, and your heart stutters in your chest before you remember, this is normal. This is every single morning of your life in 1840s rural Pennsylvania, or Ohio, or Kentucky, or any of the thousands of small farming communities scattered across a nation still stitching itself together. Your body knows what time it is, even though your eyes can't confirm it. Historians still argue whether people in the pre-electric era possessed a more finely tuned circadian rhythm, or whether they simply had no choice but to develop one. Either way, you've woken up roughly 30 minutes before dawn, and this timing isn't accidental. It's been drilled into you since childhood, a biological alarm clock wound tight by years of necessity. The rooster hasn't even started his morning performance yet, but you can feel the shift in the air, that subtle change in temperature and humidity that signals the night is loosening its grip. You lie there for a moment on your straw-tick mattress, which crinkles softly beneath you like a field of dried leaves. The mattress is exactly as uncomfortable as it sounds, stuffed with straw or corn husks, resting on a rope bed frame that sags in the middle no matter how often you tighten the ropes. This, by the way, is where the phrase "sleep tight" comes from. You literally had to tighten the ropes supporting your mattress to get a decent night's rest. And "don't let the bedbugs bite" wasn't just a cute saying. It was genuine advice, because those little bloodsuckers loved straw mattresses almost as much as they loved your warm, sleeping body. You push yourself upright, and the cold hits you immediately. Even in summer, the pre-dawn hours carry a chill, but in winter, the cold is aggressive, almost personal. Your breath fogs in front of your face, not that you can see it in this darkness, and you can feel the wooden floorboards radiating cold up through your wool socks. You slept in those socks, by the way. You sleep in most of your underclothes because changing into nightwear and then back into day clothes would be an absurd waste of time and warmth. Now comes the first real task of your day: finding fire. Not making fire from scratch, thankfully. You're not a pioneer in the wilderness, and matches do exist in this era, though they're expensive and you use them sparingly. No, you need to find the embers you banked last night in the fireplace, the glowing coals you carefully buried under ash to keep them alive through the dark hours. You shuffle across the room with your hands outstretched, navigating by memory and touch. Your shin finds the corner of the wooden chest before your hands find the mantel, and you bite back a curse because it's too early and too cold for profanity. The fireplace is the heart of your home, quite literally. It's where you cook, where you warm yourself, where you dry wet clothes and heat water, and gather as a family when the work is finally done. In the darkness, you crouch before it, and blow gently on the ash pile, watching, or rather feeling, for that faint orange glow that means salvation. There it is. A few stubborn embers have survived the night, and you feed them carefully with wood shavings and small kindling, coaxing them back to life. This is a skill you learned as a child, this patient resurrection of fire, and you've performed it thousands of times. Historians note that fire management was one of the most critical domestic skills of the era, and letting your fire die completely was considered a minor household disaster. The flames catch, finally, and the room transforms. Shadows leap up the walls, dancing and flickering, and suddenly you can see again, sort of. Firelight is nothing like electric light. It's alive, constantly moving, casting everything in shades of orange and gold and deep shadow. It's romantic in theory and genuinely challenging in practice. Try reading by firelight sometime, or threading a needle, or finding that one specific tool in a room full of similar-looking objects. Your eyes will ache, and you'll understand why people went to bed when it got dark and woke when it got light. Fighting the natural rhythm of the sun was expensive, exhausting, and mostly pointless. But the fire is going now, and warmth begins to spread through the room, and you allow yourself a moment of gratitude. This is the first victory of your day, and it's not even sunrise yet. Outside, you hear the rooster finally announce himself, that ridiculous, gargling crow that sounds like someone strangling a trumpet. He's late today, the feathered alarm clock, but you were already up anyway. You have perhaps 20 minutes before full dawn and there's no time to waste. In the 1800s, daylight is currency, and you spend it carefully. Every task that requires good light, sewing, reading, detailed repair work, gets scheduled for the brightest hours of the day. The morning and evening hours, when light is thin and unreliable, are reserved for chores you can do by feel, feeding animals, hauling water, mucking out stalls. Your entire life is organised around the sun's schedule, not yours. As the fire grows stronger, you hang a kettle over it for water. Hot water is a luxury you don't take for granted. It takes time and fuel to heat, and fuel isn't free. You spent hours last autumn chopping and stacking the wood that's now burning in your fireplace. Every flame represents labour, your labour, stored up like a bank account of warmth and light. This is something people in the electric age rarely consider. That energy used to be visible, tangible, something you could hold in your hands and feel the weight of. You didn't flip a switch and forget about it. You carried it, split it, stacked it, and fed it to the fire one piece at a time. The kettle begins to whisper, not quite boiling yet, and you use the growing light to find your boots by the door. They're stiff with cold and yesterday's dried mud, and forcing your feet into them is its own small battle. No zippers, no velcro, no elastic, just leather and laces and determination. You think briefly about the people you've heard about in cities, people who reportedly have servants to help them dress in the morning, and you snort. That's a different world, a world of wealth and gaslight and cobblestone streets. Your world is dirt and wood and the smell of animals drifting up from the barn. The first pale light is finally seeping through the single window, a small rectangle of hand-blown glass that warps everything you see through it. Dawn in the 1800s looks different than dawn in your original time. No light pollution means the colours are more intense, the stars visible until the very last moment, the horizon a gradient of purple and pink and gold that would make any Instagram filter jealous. But you don't have time to admire it. You have animals waiting, and animals don't care about beautiful sunrises. They care about food. You take one last look at the fire, making sure it's stable, then step out into the morning. The air is sharp and clean and smells like soil and wood smoke, and the particular green scent of dew on grass. Your lungs fill with it, and for just a moment, despite everything, the hard work ahead, the darkness behind, the thousand small discomforts of this life, you feel something like contentment. This is your world, your time, your place in the long story of humanity, and it's about to get much, much busier. The fire you've just coaxed back to life will sustain you for the next few hours, but it's not your only source of light in this pre-electric world. Somewhere on the mantel, nestled between a tin cup and a small wooden box of precious matches, sits a candle, partially burned, carefully preserved, representing hours of labour and a resource you can't afford to waste. Candlelight might seem quaint and romantic from your modern perspective, all flickering ambience and cosy shadows, but living by candlelight is an entirely different experience than occasionally dining by it. You reach for the candle and light it from the fire, watching the flame catch and steady itself on the wick. This particular candle is made from tallow, which is rendered animal fat, most likely from the beef cattle your neighbour slaughtered last fall. Tallow candles are the common person's candle, affordable and accessible if you're willing to do the disgusting work of making them, and disgusting is not an exaggeration. The process involves boiling animal fat for hours until it separates, skimming off the impurities, and then dipping wicks repeatedly into the molten tallow until the candle builds up layer by layer. The smell during this process is something between a greasy kitchen and a rendering plant, and it lingers in your clothes and hair for days. The candles themselves don't smell much better when burning. Tallow has a distinctly animal odour, a muttony, fatty scent that fills whatever room you're lighting. You've grown used to it, of course, the way you've grown used to most of the smells of this era. But visitors from the future would probably gag. The wealthy, those lucky few with money to spare, burn beeswax candles instead. Beeswax burns cleaner, smells faintly sweet like honey, and produces a brighter, steadier flame. It also costs roughly 10 times as much as tallow, which is why your single beeswax candle, a gift from your aunt who keeps bees, is saved for special occasions only. Christmas maybe, a wedding, the birth of a child. As you move through your morning routine, candle in hand, you're acutely aware of how quickly it's burning down. A typical tallow candle might last 4 to 6 hours, depending on its size and quality, and you probably go through 2 or 3 candles per week if you're careful. That might not sound like much until you consider that each candle represents real labour and real resources. Historians estimate that a middle-class American family in the 1840s might spend as much on candles and lamp oil as they did on food during certain months, particularly the short, dark days of winter. Light wasn't just convenient, it was a significant household expense. This is why you don't read at night unless absolutely necessary. Books exist, of course. You might even own a few, a family Bible almost certainly, maybe an almanac, perhaps a worn copy of some popular novel passed down through generations. But reading by candlelight is a strain on your eyes and a drain on your resources. The flickering light makes words swim on the page, and you have to hold the book at an awkward angle to catch enough illumination. After 20 minutes, your eyes ache and water, and you've burned through a measurable portion of your precious candle. Scholars note that literacy rates in the 1800s were actually quite high, particularly in the northern states, but recreational reading was a luxury that many families simply couldn't afford in terms of time and light. So what do you do when the sun goes down? Mostly you go to bed. The concept of nightlife barely exists outside of cities, and even there it's limited to those who can afford the oil for their lamps, or the entrance fee to establishments that provide lighting. For you, a farmer or tradesperson in rural America, darkness means rest. Your body is exhausted from the day's labour anyway, and there's something almost peaceful about surrendering to the night, about letting the darkness wrap around you like a blanket and carrying you into sleep. You rise with the sun and sleep with the sun, and your body adjusts to this rhythm more readily than you might expect. But candles aren't your only option for light after dark. You also have oil lamps which burn whale oil, or later in the century kerosene. Whale oil, yes, from actual whales, harvested by ships that sailed for years at a time, hunting leviathans across the world's oceans just so you could see to darn your socks after sunset. There's something almost surreal about that supply chain, isn't there? The light in your small farmhouse connected by invisible threads to harpoons and blubber, and the vast, cold depths of the Pacific. Whale oil burns brighter than tallow candles and with less odour, but it's also more expensive and harder to obtain if you live far from port cities. The lamp itself is a simple device, a reservoir for oil, a wick that draws the fuel upward through capillary action, and a flame that consumes the oil as it burns. You trim the wick regularly to prevent smoking, a skill that's so common in this era that wick trimmer is a standard household tool, often ornate and handed down through families. A poorly trimmed lamp produces a smoky, uneven flame that blackens the ceiling and fills the room with soot. You've learned to trim yours just right, a small domestic triumph that brings disproportionate satisfaction. Here's a quirky detail that historians love to mention. The brightness of various light sources in this era was often measured in candle power, a unit that literally compared other lights to a standard candle. A good whale oil lamp might produce the equivalent of several candles, making it the luxury option for evening illumination. But even several candles worth of light is dim by modern standards, probably less than a single weak light bulb. You could read by it, sure, but you'd be squinting and you'd pay for it with headaches and eye strain. The arrival of kerosene in the 1850s changes things somewhat. Kerosene is refined from petroleum, and it burns brighter and more cleanly than whale oil while being significantly cheaper. The kerosene lamp becomes a household staple within a decade of its introduction, and suddenly people have access to affordable, reliable light after dark. Historians still argue whether this represents a genuine improvement in quality of life or simply an extension of the working day into hours that were previously reserved for rest. Probably both, honestly. Progress is rarely unmixed in its blessings. But for now, in the early morning darkness, You're working by the light of your single tallow candle and the growing flames in your fireplace. The combination provides enough illumination to find what you need without bumping into furniture, but not much more. You move through familiar spaces by memory as much as sight, your hands knowing where things are even when your eyes can't confirm it. This kind of spatial memory is something modern people rarely develop. Why would you, when you can flood any room with light at the touch of a button? But you've honed it to a fine edge through necessity. The candle gutters as a draft slips through the gaps in your window frame, and you shield it with your hand, protecting that precious flame. You've seen what happens when a candle blows out at an inopportune moment. The scramble for matches, the bumped shins, the cursing in the dark. Better to guard the light you have than to waste resources relighting it. This protective instinct extends to all your light sources. You never leave a candle unattended, both because of fire risk and because you don't want it burning when no one's using it. Every minute of light is a minute you've paid for in labour or money. Outside, the sky is brightening further, and you feel the familiar relief that comes with each dawn. Another night survived, another day beginning, another cycle in the endless rhythm of dark and light that governs your existence. You blow out the candle, no sense wasting it now that natural light is available, and set it carefully back on the mantel for tonight. The tallow is still soft and warm, and you press your thumb against it briefly, feeling the give, knowing that this small cylinder represents security against the darkness. Your eyes adjust to the morning light flooding through the window, and the room transforms. What was shadow and suggestion becomes solid and real. The rough-hewn table, the ladder-back chairs, the cast-iron pots hanging by the fireplace. Everything is exactly where you left it, of course, but there's something reassuring about being able to see it confirmed. You've spent so many hours in darkness that light itself feels like a gift, and you never quite lose the appreciation for it, no matter how many sunrises you witness. The fire crackling in your hearth isn't just a source of light and warmth, it's the absolute centre of your existence, the sun around which your entire household orbits. Without it, you cannot cook. Without it, you cannot heat water. Without it, in winter, you will simply die, frozen solid in your own home like something out of a grim fairy tale. Fire is life in the most literal sense, and your relationship with it is more intimate than any relationship you have with another human being. You feed it, tend it, coax it, fear it, and depend on it utterly. Maintaining a household fire is a full-time job that never ends. You can't just light it in the morning and forget about it. Flames need constant attention, constant fuel, constant management to keep burning at the right intensity for whatever task you're performing. Cooking requires different fire conditions than heating, which requires different conditions than boiling water for laundry. You become an expert in flame manipulation without ever consciously studying it, learning through endless repetition which woods burn hot and fast, which smoulder slowly, how to bank coals for overnight, how to position logs for maximum heat output. Let's talk about firewood for a moment, because this is a subject that deserves serious attention. The average American household in the early 1800s burned between 15 and 25 cords of wood per year. A cord, if you're not familiar with the term, is a stack of wood measuring 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long, roughly 128 cubic feet of timber. 25 cords is a staggering amount of wood. Cutting, splitting, hauling, and stacking that much timber is a year-round occupation, and you're never truly finished. Even in the heat of summer, you're thinking about winter, preparing for the cold months when your survival depends on the fuel you've stored. The work of gathering firewood falls primarily on the men and older boys of the household, though everyone helps when necessary. You spend countless hours in the woodlot with an axe, identifying suitable trees, felling them, cutting them into manageable lengths, and then splitting those lengths into pieces that will fit in your fireplace. This is grueling physical labour that builds a particular kind of strength, what your descendants might call farmer strong, and leaves you exhausted and sore in muscles you didn't know you had. The axe becomes an extension of your body, and you can judge the quality of a piece of wood by the sound it makes when the blade bites in. Different types of wood serve different purposes, and you know them all by heart. Oak burns hot and long, making it ideal for heating but less suitable for quick cooking fires. Pine catches easily, but burns fast and produces excessive smoke. It's useful for kindling, but wasteful as primary fuel. Hickory is prized for smoking meat, imparting a distinctive flavour that you can recognise instantly. Apple and cherry wood burn sweetly and are saved for special occasions when you want the house to smell pleasant. Historians note that wood preference varied significantly by region, depending on what species were locally available, and fierce debates existed about which wood was truly best. The fireplace itself is a piece of technology that seems simple but isn't. The design evolved over centuries to maximise heat output, while minimising smoke accumulation in the living space. Your fireplace likely has a large opening, a deep hearth where coals can be raked for cooking, and an angled back wall that reflects heat into the room. The chimney draws smoke upward and out, but it also draws heated air with it, which is why fireplaces are notoriously inefficient. Some estimates suggest that 80 to 90% of the heat generated goes straight up the chimney, rather than warming your home. Benjamin Franklin, that tireless American inventor, spent considerable effort trying to improve fireplace design. His Franklin stove, introduced in the 1740s, was essentially a metal-lined fireplace that radiated heat from multiple surfaces, significantly improving efficiency. Versions of his design are still manufactured today, which tells you something about how well it worked. But the Franklin stove and its descendants cost money, and not everyone could afford one. Many households, particularly poorer ones, made do with open hearths that hadn't changed fundamentally in centuries. Your morning fire is now burning steadily, and you add a larger log to sustain it while you handle other tasks. The rhythm of fire maintenance becomes automatic after years of practice. Check the flames every few minutes, add fuel as needed, adjust the airflow by opening or closing dampers, rake coals when they're at the right stage. You do all of this without consciously thinking about it, the way a modern person might adjust a thermostat or check their phone. Fire is simply part of your mental landscape, always present, always demanding a small portion of your attention. The dangers of fire are equally ever present. House fires were terrifyingly common in the 1800s, and entire families were sometimes lost when flames spread faster than they could escape. You've heard stories, everyone has, of children caught in burning buildings, of entire towns reduced to ash when a single fire spread out of control. Your own grandmother died in a fire, and the memory of that tragedy haunts your family still. You treat fire with respect bordering on fear, never leaving flames unattended, keeping water nearby at all times, teaching your children from infancy that fire is both friend and potential enemy. Chimney fires are another constant concern. Creosote, a tarry substance produced when wood burns incompletely, builds up on the inside of chimneys over time. If enough accumulates and the conditions are right, say, a particularly hot fire on a cold night, the creosote can ignite, sending flames roaring up the chimney and potentially spreading to the roof or surrounding structure. You clean your chimney at least once a year, usually in late summer before the heating season begins, using long brushes and a lot of elbow grease. It's a dirty, unpleasant job, but it's preferable to watching your house burn down. Cooking over an open fire is an art form that modern people can barely comprehend. You don't have temperature controls or timers or non-stick surfaces. You have flames, coals, and cast iron, and you make it work through skill and experience. Different dishes require different heat levels. Bread needs steady, moderate heat. Meat needs high initial heat, followed by slower cooking. Delicate sauces require constant attention and carefully managed coals. You judge temperature by holding your hand near the heat source and counting seconds, a technique so common it has a name, the hand test. And it's surprisingly accurate once you've calibrated your internal sense. The cast iron cookware hanging by your fireplace is among your most valuable possessions. A good cast iron pot or skillet can last generations if properly cared for, and yours probably belonged to your mother, who got it from her mother. The seasoning, that black non-stick coating built up over years of use, is a point of pride. You never scrub your cast iron with soap, which would strip the seasoning, but clean it with salt and oil and careful heat. These pots are heavy, awkward, and absolutely essential, and you can't imagine cooking without them. Here's a detail that might surprise you. Most cooking in this era happens in a single large pot. The iconic image of a frontier dinner is a cast iron pot hanging over the fire, filled with a stew or pottage of whatever ingredients are available. This one-pot cooking isn't just convenient, it's efficient, using minimal fuel and requiring minimal attention compared to multiple dishes prepared separately. The result is that most meals taste similar, hearty, savoury, filling, and the concept of distinct courses is reserved for the wealthy, who have servants and multiple cooking facilities. Your fire is burning well now, the water in the kettle finally reaching a boil, steam rising in a gentle plume. You've achieved the first major victory of the day: heat, light, hot water. These simple things, which a modern person could accomplish in seconds with appliances, have taken you perhaps 20 minutes of careful work, and this is just the beginning. With the fire burning steadily and the kettle beginning to sing, you turn your attention to a task that will define your day as much as any other: water. You need water for everything: drinking, cooking, cleaning, washing, feeding animals, mixing medicines, preparing food, bathing occasionally, laundry, dreaded laundry, and 100 other small tasks that add up to gallons and gallons of this essential resource. And unlike your modern descendants, who merely turn a faucet and watch water magically appear, you have to physically collect every single drop you use. Your water source depends on where you live and how fortunate you've been in the geographic lottery. If you're lucky, you have a well relatively close to your house, perhaps 50 yards away, close enough to be convenient but far enough from the privy to avoid contamination. If you're less lucky, you're drawing water from a stream or spring that might be a quarter-mile distant. Either way, the equation is the same. You need to travel to the water, fill containers, and carry those containers back home, multiple times per day, in all weather conditions, regardless of how tired or sick or busy you happen to be. The carrying apparatus is usually a yoke, a curved wooden bar that rests across your shoulders with buckets hanging from each end. A full bucket of water weighs roughly 40 pounds, so you're looking at 80 pounds of water per trip if you're carrying 2 buckets. Now imagine making that trip 6, 8, 10 times a day, more on laundry day or baking day, or any other occasion requiring extra water. Your shoulders develop permanent calluses where the yoke rests, and your back learns a particular kind of ache that never quite goes away. Children start hauling water as soon as they're strong enough to carry a bucket, usually around age 7 or 8. It's considered light work, appropriate for small bodies, even though any modern parent would blanch at the thought of their second grader staggering under 40 pounds of sloshing water. But this is the reality of your world. Everyone works, everyone contributes, and water hauling is simply one of many chores that children perform as a matter of course. Historians note that childhood in the 1800s was a distinctly different concept than childhood today, less protected, more integrated into the adult world of labour and responsibility. Well, water is generally preferred over stream water, partly because it's more convenient and partly because it's often cleaner. A properly constructed well taps into groundwater that's been naturally filtered through layers of soil and rock, emerging relatively free of the sediments and organisms that make surface water problematic. But wells can go dry in drought, or become contaminated by seeping waste, or simply run low in summer when the water table drops. You've experienced all of these problems at various times, and each one represents a minor crisis requiring either conservation, repair, or a long trek to an alternative water source. Here's something that might keep you up at night if you think about it too hard. Nobody in the 1800s truly understands germ theory. Oh, people have vague notions that some water is bad and can make you sick, and there's plenty of folk wisdom about avoiding stagnant pools and boiling water when illness is going around. But the scientific understanding that invisible microorganisms cause disease won't become widely accepted until the latter part of the century. This means you might be drinking water contaminated with cholera, typhoid, dysentery, or any number of other pathogens without ever knowing it until you or someone in your family falls desperately ill. Cholera epidemics sweep through American communities repeatedly in the 1800s, killing thousands and terrifying millions more. The disease spreads primarily through contaminated water, but people don't know that. They blame everything from bad air to moral failing to divine punishment. Historians still argue whether public health improvements or simple luck account for some communities being spared while others were devastated. What's certain is that water-related diseases were among the leading causes of death, particularly among children, and that drinking water was genuinely dangerous in ways that wouldn't be fully understood for decades. You don't think about this, of course. You drink your well water and hope for the best, same as everyone else. The water tastes slightly mineral, with a coolness that never quite fades even in the heat of summer. Groundwater maintains a steady temperature year-round, one of its few advantages over surface sources. You've grown up drinking this water, and your body has developed some resistance to whatever microorganisms it contains, a fact that would make you far more resilient to local pathogens than any visitor from the future. The water you're boiling now will be used for multiple purposes. Some will become hot drinks, not coffee for you probably, that's expensive, but perhaps a weak tea made from local herbs, or simply hot water flavoured with a bit of honey. Some will be used for cooking, softening dried corn or beans, or making the day's porridge. Some will be set aside for washing, both dishes and faces and hands. Every drop is allocated mentally before you pour it, a habit of conservation that's deeply ingrained. Storing water is its own challenge. You have various containers, wooden buckets, ceramic crocks, perhaps a metal cistern if you're relatively prosperous, and you keep them covered to prevent contamination from dust, insects, or curious animals. Water sitting in wooden containers takes on a faint flavour from the wood, which you've stopped noticing but which would be immediately apparent to modern taste buds. The crocks are better for drinking water, and you keep one near the eating area for easy access during meals. In winter, water hauling becomes even more challenging. The well may freeze over, requiring you to break through ice before you can lower your bucket. The water in your storage containers can freeze overnight if kept too far from the fire, and you've learned to keep at least one container close enough to the hearth to prevent this. Walking to and from the water source in snow and ice is treacherous, and spilled water can turn your path into a dangerous skating rink. You've fallen more than once, buckets flying, water soaking through your clothes in the freezing cold. These are not fond memories. Some households, particularly those with the resources to invest in infrastructure, have cisterns that collect rainwater from rooftops. Rainwater is soft, free of the minerals that make groundwater hard, and preferred for certain tasks like washing hair or doing laundry. But cisterns require maintenance, can become breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and are only useful when it actually rains. In drought periods, you're back to the well like everyone else. The morning water run is something you'll complete before breakfast, hauling enough to get through at least the first half of the day. You step outside with your yoke and buckets, the cold air hitting your face like a slap, and begin the familiar walk to the well. The ground is still dewy, grass soaking your boots, and the sky's fully light now, a clear blue that promises a decent day weather-wise. Birds are singing their morning chorus, a complex symphony that you've stopped consciously hearing, but that provides a pleasant backdrop to your labours. At the well, you lower the bucket on its rope, hear the splash as it hits water, wait for it to fill, and then begin the long haul back up. Your arms and shoulders know this movement so well they perform it automatically, hand over hand, the rope rough against your palms. The bucket emerges dripping, and you pour its contents into your carrying buckets with practiced efficiency. Then down again, splash, wait, pull. Twice more until both carrying buckets are full. The walk back is the hard part, water sloshing and shifting, the yoke pressing into your shoulders, each step requiring careful balance. You've developed a particular gait for this work, a smooth, shuffling stride that minimises sloshing and distributes the weight evenly. Your ancestors perfected this walk over generations, and you perform it without thinking, arriving back at the house with most of your water intact. Back inside with your water, the fire dancing cheerfully and the house warming by slow degrees, you finally turn your attention to breakfast. Your stomach has been reminding you of its existence for the past hour, and now that the essential morning tasks are handled, fire lit, water hauled, animals briefly checked on, you can actually eat something. But breakfast in the 1800s bears little resemblance to the meal you might be imagining. No cereal from a box, no milk from a refrigerated carton, no toast popping up from an electric toaster. Your breakfast comes from what you've managed to preserve, grow, or barter for, and it looks roughly the same every single day. The foundation of your morning meal is corn. Corn in some form, cornmeal mush, johnny cakes, corn pone, hominy, grits, appears at almost every meal in rural America during this era, and breakfast is no exception. Corn is cheap, abundant, easy to grow in American soil, and versatile enough to prepare in dozens of different ways. You have a sack of cornmeal in your pantry, ground from last fall's harvest at the local mill, and this morning you'll be making mush. Cornmeal boiled in water until it forms a thick porridge-like consistency. It's bland, filling, and provides the calories you'll need to fuel a morning of hard labour. You might improve the mush with what you have available. A dollop of molasses if you're fortunate. Molasses is the poor person's sweetener, a byproduct of sugar refining that's cheap and plentiful. A splash of milk if your cow is producing and you haven't already used today's portion for something else. A bit of butter perhaps, though butter is valuable, and you're always calculating whether to use it now or save it for later. The mush is serviceable either way, warming your belly and providing sustenance, if not exactly pleasure. Alongside the mush, you might have meat. Not fresh meat. Fresh meat is a luxury in a world without refrigeration, but preserved meat, salt pork, bacon, smoked ham, perhaps some jerky left over from last hunting season. Salt pork is particularly common. Hunks of pork belly packed in barrels of salt that can last for months without spoiling. The salt draws out moisture, creating an environment where bacteria can't thrive, and the resulting meat is hard, chewy, and intensely salty. You cut off a piece, soak it in water to remove some of the salt, and fry it in its own fat over the fire. The smell is incredible, filling your small house with the aroma of cooking pork, and your mouth waters despite the simplicity of the meal. Eggs might appear if your chickens are laying, though egg production fluctuates with the seasons. Hens lay prolifically in spring and summer when days are long, but production drops off sharply in the darker months. You've learned to preserve eggs when they are abundant, coating them in lard or water glass to seal the shells and extend their useful life. But even preserved eggs are saved for baking and special occasions rather than daily breakfasts. This morning, if you're lucky, you might have 1 or 2 fresh eggs from the coop, collected yesterday and kept cool in the cellar. You fry them in the pork fat, the whites setting quickly, the yolks remaining runny enough to soak into your cornmeal mush. What you don't have is fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, or much of anything that might be called healthy by modern standards. The concept of a balanced diet doesn't exist yet, not in any scientific sense, and your breakfast is primarily carbohydrates and fat, with protein from the pork and eggs if available. Vitamins and minerals come from wherever you happen to get them, and deficiency diseases like scurvy, rickets and pellagra are not uncommon, particularly in populations with limited food variety. Historians note that the 1800s American diet was remarkably monotonous by modern standards, with the same few foods appearing meal after meal, season after season. Bread might appear at breakfast if you baked recently, though bread baking is a significant undertaking that you don't perform daily. Yeast bread requires time to rise, careful temperature management, and a hot oven, which means building up your fire substantially and maintaining it at the right level for an extended period. Most households bake once or twice a week, producing enough loaves to last several days before they go stale or mouldy. By the 4th or 5th day, the bread is hard enough to require dunking in liquid before eating, but nothing is wasted. Stale bread becomes bread pudding, or is crumbled into soups, or is simply gnawed slowly until it softens in your mouth. Quick breads are more common than yeast breads for daily consumption. Biscuits, Johnny cakes, corn pone. These require no rising time and can be made fresh each morning with relative ease. The basic formula is flour or cornmeal, a bit of fat, a liquid, and a leavening agent. Baking soda and baking powder become widely available during the 1800s, transforming home baking by providing quick, reliable leavening without the unpredictability of wild yeast. You probably have a tin of baking soda in your pantry, treasured for its versatility in both cooking and cleaning. Your breakfast drink is a subject of some regional and economic variation. Coffee is becoming increasingly popular in America during the 1800s, but it's expensive and not universally available. Tea is an option if you have access to imported goods or know how to prepare herbal substitutes from local plants. Many families simply drink water, milk when available, or various homemade beverages like switchel, a mixture of water, vinegar, molasses and ginger that's surprisingly refreshing. Alcoholic drinks, including weak beer and cider, are sometimes consumed at breakfast without the stigma that would later attach to morning drinking. Alcohol was often safer than water, and the alcohol content of these daily beverages was usually low. You sit at your rough wooden table, the firelight flickering across the room, and eat your breakfast in the growing light of morning. The mush is bland but filling, the salt pork wonderfully savoury, the whole meal washed down with warm water from the kettle. It takes perhaps 15 minutes to consume, eaten quickly because there's work to be done and no time for leisurely dining. Your family eats with you if they're awake, spouse, children, perhaps an elderly parent, gathered around the table in a moment of brief togetherness before the day's labours scatter you to different tasks. Plates and utensils are simple and scarce. You might have a wooden trencher or a pewter plate, a spoon carved from wood or cast from metal, perhaps a knife but almost certainly not a fork. Forks don't become common in American households until later in the century. You eat with your hands when appropriate, using bread to soak up liquids, bringing the bowl directly to your lips to drink the last of the mush. Table manners exist, especially in wealthier homes, but daily meals in working households are practical rather than elegant. When the meal is finished, you scrape your plate clean and set it aside for washing later. Nothing is wasted, not even the burnt bits stuck to the bottom of the pot, which will be soaked loose and eaten or given to the pigs. The concept of food waste is almost foreign to you. Food represents labour, money, survival, and every scrap is precious. You wipe your mouth, take a last sip of water, and push back from the table. The morning is now fully underway, the sun streaming through your window, the fire burning steadily. Your belly is full, your body is warm, and you have approximately 12 hours of daylight ahead of you. How you spend those hours depends on the season, the weather, and the particular demands of your household. But one thing is certain, you will not be idle. There is always work to be done. Breakfast consumed and the morning properly begun, you now face a task that might seem simple from a modern perspective, but actually requires considerable thought and effort: getting dressed. You're already wearing most of your clothes. You slept in your undergarments, remember, and pulled on wool socks and boots first thing. But transitioning from night state to day state involves more than just rolling out of bed. Every garment serves a purpose, every layer is deliberate, and the entire process of dressing reflects a world where clothing was handmade, expensive, and expected to last for years. Your wardrobe, by modern standards, is microscopic. You might own 3 or 4 changes of clothes total, not counting specialty items like a Sunday suit or a wedding dress preserved for the children. This scarcity means that each piece must work hard, serving multiple functions and lasting through countless washes and repairs. The fabric is different too, heavier, coarser, more durable than the lightweight cottons and synthetics of the future. Wool dominates for outer garments, providing warmth even when wet and wearing like iron. Linen appears in underclothes and summer wear, cool against the skin but requiring careful handling. Cotton is becoming more available thanks to the cotton gin, but it's still primarily for those who can afford quality cloth. Let's talk about underwear, because this is a subject that surprises many people. Men in this era typically wear a long shirt that functions as both undershirt and, how to put this delicately, underwear. The shirt tails are long enough to tuck between the legs and provide some covering where it's needed. Separate undergarments, what we might call boxers or briefs, don't become common until later in the century. Women wear chemises under their dresses, along with multiple layers of petticoats, and their undergarments are similarly designed for modesty and function, rather than comfort as we understand it. Over your undergarments goes your day shirt, typically made of linen or cotton, with a collar that can be detached and laundered separately. Collars get dirty faster than shirts, and this modular approach extends the life of both components. You button the shirt up with actual buttons, which are themselves small treasures, each one carved from bone or shell or cast from metal. Losing a button is a genuine inconvenience, and you check them regularly, sewing down any that seem loose before they fall off and disappear into the cracks of your floorboards. Trousers come next for men, held up not by belt loops, an invention of the later 1800s, but by suspenders, braces, or simple drawstrings. The fit is different than modern pants, looser in some areas and tighter in others, with no stretch and no give. You learn to move within the constraints of your clothing, developing a physical vocabulary shaped by the garments you wear. Women don't wear trousers at all, of course, that would be scandalous, but instead navigate their days in long skirts that require constant management around fires, mud, and machinery. Women's clothing deserves special attention because it's so dramatically different from modern dress. Multiple layers of petticoats create volume and shape under the outer skirt, sometimes supported by a framework of hoops or bustles depending on the current fashion. Corsets cinch the waist, providing support and achieving the desired silhouette, though the bone-crushing torture devices of popular imagination are mostly an upper-class phenomenon. Working women need to breathe and bend and move. The entire ensemble takes significant time to put on, and requires help with the difficult-to-reach buttons and laces at the back. Historians note that women's dress during this period represented a complex negotiation between fashion ideals, practical necessities, and available resources. Pockets are a fascinating detail that differs dramatically from modern expectation. Men's garments typically include pockets sewn into the pants or vest, convenient for carrying small items. Women's garments usually don't have pockets. Fashion dictates smooth lines. So women wear separate pocket bags tied around the waist under their skirts, accessed through slits in the fabric. Losing your pocket bag means losing whatever you've placed inside it, and the contents, a handkerchief, some coins, perhaps a small knife or sewing kit, represent hours of labour or hard-earned money. Shoes are another investment. Your boots are leather, made by a local cobbler or purchased from a travelling craftsman, and they cost more than you'd probably like. Good boots can last years with proper care, and you treat yours accordingly, oiling the leather, drying them carefully when wet, repairing stitches before they unravel further. Many households have a boot jack, a simple device for removing boots without bending over, and a set of tools for basic shoe repair. When boots finally wear beyond repair, the leather is repurposed for patches, hinges, or other uses. Nothing is wasted. Here's a quirky detail. Shoes in this era aren't specifically made for left and right feet. Straight-lasted shoes, as they're called, are shaped symmetrically and gradually conform to whichever foot you put them on. This sounds uncomfortable, and it is, at least until the leather molds to your specific foot shape. The idea of buying shoes pre-shaped for left and right feet is a later innovation, one of those small improvements that seem obvious in retrospect but took surprisingly long to become standard. Headwear is important regardless of gender. Men wear hats outdoors almost universally, both for protection from sun and weather and as a marker of respectability. The specific style varies by region, occupation, and economic status, but going hatless marks you as either poor, eccentric, or foreign. Women wear bonnets, those iconic head coverings with a projecting brim that shields the face from sun. A pale complexion is desirable, and tanned skin suggests outdoor labour, something respectable women avoid. Hair is kept up, pinned elaborately, covered when outdoors, and washing it is such an ordeal that you might go weeks between shampoos. Dressing takes 15 to 20 minutes when you include all the components. Undergarments, shirt, trousers or skirts, stockings pulled up and secured with garters, boots laced and tied, suspenders attached, collar buttoned, hat placed just so. Women take longer, especially if fashion demands tight lacing or complicated hairstyles. The whole process is ritualized, performed in roughly the same order every day, and becomes as automatic as any other aspect of your daily routine. Your clothing, once on, will stay on until bedtime unless disaster strikes. You don't change for different activities or freshen up between tasks. The concept of having separate outfits for work, leisure, and sleep is a luxury that most people cannot afford. What you put on in the morning is what you'll wear through farm chores, household tasks, meals, visits with neighbours, and eventually to bed. Only your Sunday clothes are reserved for special use, kept clean and carefully stored, brought out for church and important social occasions, and then immediately put away again. The weight of your clothing, the restriction of movement, the layers upon layers, all of this seems like punishment to modern sensibilities. But you've never known anything different, and the trade-offs make sense when you consider them. Durability matters more than comfort when a single garment represents days of labour. Warmth matters more than breathability when a winter without adequate clothing can kill you. Modesty matters in a society where respectability is currency, where how you present yourself can determine your economic opportunities and social standing. You're dressed now, properly equipped for the day ahead, and you step out of the sleeping area into the main room of your house. The fire is burning, breakfast has been eaten, the sun is well up, and the real work can begin. The morning sun is climbing higher, the dew is burning off the grass, and there's a particular task you've been avoiding. Not because you forgot about it, but because it requires a certain mental preparation. You need to visit the outhouse, the privy, the necessary house, the place that dare not speak its name but that every single person in this era visits multiple times daily, usually while trying not to think too hard about what they're doing. Your outhouse sits perhaps 50 feet from your main dwelling, far enough to keep the smell at a comfortable distance but close enough to reach in an emergency. It's a small wooden structure, roughly 4 feet by 4 feet, with a peaked roof and a door that never quite closes properly. Inside, a simple bench with 1 or 2 holes cut into it spans the width of the structure, positioned over a pit that descends perhaps 8 feet into the earth. That pit is where everything goes, and it's your least favourite topic of conversation, which is saying something, given how many unpleasant aspects of daily life you've already accepted. The walk to the outhouse is unremarkable in good weather, but imagine it in January, with snow piled knee-deep and temperatures well below freezing. Imagine it in August, when the smell has ripened in the summer heat until it's nearly visible. Imagine it at 3 a.m, when you wake with urgent need and must navigate the darkness to that cold, stinking box. There's a reason chamber pots exist, and you keep one under the bed for nighttime emergencies, but even the chamber pot has to be emptied eventually, and guess where its contents go? The experience inside the outhouse is exactly as uncomfortable as you'd imagine. The seat is freezing in winter, trapping cold that seems to radiate directly into your bones through your most vulnerable areas. Spiders love the dark corners, and the supply of insects attracted to the waste below. Flies are omnipresent in warmer months, buzzing persistently, landing where you definitely don't want them to land. The smell varies from tolerable to eye-watering depending on the temperature, the last time lime was added to the pit, and how many people have used the facility recently. Privacy is relative. The door might latch, but walls have gaps, and anyone walking by can probably hear what you're doing. In some households, the outhouse is a two-seater, designed for efficiency rather than modesty, and you might find yourself conducting business alongside a family member or neighbour. Historians note that attitudes toward bodily functions were somewhat different in this era. Less private, less shameful, more simply a fact of life that everyone had to manage. This doesn't mean people were comfortable with public elimination. It just means the infrastructure didn't support the absolute privacy that modern people consider essential. Toilet paper, as we know it, doesn't exist yet. You use whatever is available. Corn cobs, surprisingly effective apparently. Newspaper if you have access to it. Pages from old catalogues. The Sears catalogue will eventually become famous for this secondary use. Leaves in desperate circumstances, or rags that are washed and reused. The concept of soft, quilted, disposable paper specifically designed for this purpose would seem absurdly decadent to most people in the 1800s. You make do with what you have, as you make do with everything else. The pit beneath the outhouse fills up over time, requiring periodic attention. In some cases, the waste is simply allowed to decompose and is eventually spread on fields as fertilizer. The original recycling program, crude but effective. In other cases, the pit is dug out manually, a job that is exactly as horrible as it sounds, and usually assigned to the lowest person on the social ladder. Night soil men, as they're sometimes called, make a living collecting human waste from urban privies and selling it to farmers. Historians still argue whether this practice represented practical resource management or a public health disaster waiting to happen, and the answer is probably both. Water closets, early flush toilets, do exist in this era, primarily in wealthy urban homes. The technology dates back centuries in various forms, but indoor plumbing is expensive and requires a reliable water supply, making it impractical for most Americans. If you've heard of such marvels, you probably consider them curiosities of the rich, as relevant to your daily life as palace ballrooms or trained servants. The outhouse is your reality, and it will remain so for your entire lifetime. Here's something that might help you appreciate your modern bathroom. The average American today uses the toilet 6 to 8 times per day in climate-controlled comfort, with soft paper, effective plumbing, and complete privacy. In your 1800s existence, each of those visits involves a 50-foot walk, exposure to weather, exposure to insects, and intimate contact with an unpleasant wooden seat over a pit of accumulated waste. Multiply that experience by every day of your life, and you begin to understand why indoor plumbing was greeted as one of the great advances of civilization. Urination, for men at least, can be accomplished more casually, behind the barn, against a fence post, wherever privacy can be briefly obtained. Women have it harder, their long skirts and multiple layers making any outdoor elimination a complicated undertaking. Chamber pots are more commonly used by women for this reason, emptied discreetly by someone in the household. The gender disparity in bathroom convenience is just one of many such inequities built into the structures of daily life. After completing your morning business, you might wash your hands, or you might not. The connection between hand hygiene and disease prevention isn't widely understood yet, and the effort required to wash, hauling water, heating it, using precious soap, means that people often skip it for minor tasks. Soap itself is a homemade product in many households, rendered from animal fat and lye in a process that takes days and produces a harsh, effective cleaning agent. You save the soap for important cleaning jobs, not for casual hand washing after every outhouse visit. The outhouse remains behind you, door swinging slightly in the morning breeze as you walk back toward the house. Your body feels lighter, relieved of its burden, and you push the experience from your mind with practiced efficiency. There's too much to do today to dwell on bathroom visits, and besides, you'll be back in a few hours to repeat the entire process. The outhouse is simply part of your landscape, unremarkable in its unpleasantness, as natural as sunrise and just as inevitable. With the most personal of morning tasks behind you, you turn toward the barn, where another set of obligations waits with increasingly vocal impatience. The animals need tending, and they don't care that you're tired, or that your shoulders still ache from yesterday's work, or that you'd rather sit by the fire a few minutes longer. Cows need milking, horses need feeding, chickens need releasing from their coop, pigs need slopping. The demands of livestock structure rural life as firmly as the sun structures day and night. Your barn sits 100 feet from the house, close enough for convenience, but far enough that the smells don't overwhelm your living space, most of the time. It's a sturdy wooden structure, perhaps 30 feet by 40 feet, with a hayloft above and stalls below. The construction represents years of labour and significant investment. Timber cut and hauled and shaped, nails purchased at considerable expense, the whole thing raised with the help of neighbours in a community barn raising that you still remember fondly despite the exhaustion. The sound of animals greets you as you approach, cows lowing, horses stamping, chickens already chattering in their coop nearby. They've learned that your appearance means food, and their excitement is both gratifying and faintly demanding. You slide the barn door open, it sticks slightly as always, and step into the dim, hay-scented interior. The smell is complex. Sweet hay, warm animal bodies, manure both fresh and composted, leather tack, the indefinable musk of large mammals living in close quarters. You've stopped noticing it except when you return from somewhere else, and then it hits you fresh. A reminder of just how much of your life is bound up with these creatures. Milking comes first. Your cow, a gentle brown creature you've had for 6 years, shifts in her stall as you approach with the milking stool and pail. She knows the routine as well as you do, and she's ready. Her udder is full and uncomfortable after a night of milk production, and she welcomes relief as much as you need the milk. You settle onto the stool, position the pail, and begin the rhythmic squeeze and pull that coaxes milk from her teats. It's meditative work once you get going, the steady stream of milk ringing against the metal pail, the cow's warmth radiating against your cheek, the quiet morning sounds filling the space. Milking is women's work in many households, but you do it regardless of your gender because it needs doing and you're the one who's available. Gender roles in the 1800s are real and enforced, but they're also flexible in practice. Farms need every pair of hands, and survival trumps propriety. Historians note that rural households were more egalitarian in labour division than their urban counterparts, simply because the work wouldn't get done otherwise. A woman might plough a field if her husband is sick. A man might milk a cow if his wife is in labour. The work is what matters. The milk bucket fills slowly, maybe 2 to 3 gallons from a healthy cow, depending on her condition and the time of year. Dairy production fluctuates with diet, stress and lactation cycle, and you've learned to read your cow's condition from her milk. Thin and bluish when she's not eating well, rich and creamy when she's thriving. Today's milk looks good, and you'll use it for drinking, cooking, and possibly butter or cheese if there's enough surplus. With milking done, you turn to the chickens. The coop is a smaller structure near the barn, and the birds are already clucking impatiently when you open the door. They stream out in a flurry of feathers and squawking, heading for their favourite scratching spots, already hunting for insects and seeds. You check the nesting boxes, 3 eggs today, still warm, which is decent for this time of year. The eggs go into your apron or a basket, handled carefully because a broken egg is food wasted, and you can't afford to waste food. Chickens are relatively easy keepers. They feed themselves largely on bugs and scraps, require minimal shelter, and produce eggs almost daily during their productive months. The trade-off is vulnerability. Foxes, hawks, raccoons, and a dozen other predators consider chickens delicious and poorly defended. You've lost birds before, waking to a coop full of feathers and blood, and the loss stings both emotionally and economically. A good laying hen represents real value, real investment, and her death means eggs you won't have for months until a replacement is raised. Pigs occupy a pen near the barn, rooting contentedly in the mud and manure that comprises their world. Pigs are perhaps the most efficient converters of scraps into meat that exist. They'll eat almost anything, from table scraps to rotten vegetables to things you'd rather not think about, and every rural household that can afford it keeps at least 1 or 2 for slaughter in the fall. You dump a bucket of slop into their trough, kitchen scraps, sour milk, garden refuse, and watch them shoulder each other aside in their eagerness. Pigs are smart, smarter than dogs by some measures, but you try not to think about that because come November, they'll be hanging in the smokehouse. The horse or horses, if you're prosperous enough to own them, require the most careful attention. A horse represents a massive investment, more than a year's income for some families, and losing one to injury or illness can be financially devastating. You check hooves, inspect legs, run hands over flanks feeling for heat or swelling. You fork hay into the manger and ensure fresh water is available. If you're using the horse for work today, you'll spend additional time brushing, checking tack, and preparing for whatever task lies ahead. Not everyone owns a horse, by the way. Oxen are more common for heavy work, slower but stronger, cheaper to acquire and maintain, less prone to injury. Many families manage with just a cow for milk, some chickens for eggs, and a pig for meat, borrowing or renting larger animals when needed for ploughing or transportation. The full Noah's Ark of farm animals that we imagine when we picture the 1800s is actually the province of the relatively prosperous. Poorer families make do with much less. The barn chores take somewhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on your livestock inventory and their specific needs. By the time you're finished, animals fed, watered, milked, turned out to pasture or penned appropriately, the morning is well advanced. Your hands smell of cow and your boots are inevitably fouled with something organic, but you've accomplished the first major work of the day. The animals will need attention again at midday and evening, a cycle that continues every single day regardless of weather, holiday, or personal circumstance. Taking a vacation, in the modern sense of simply leaving for a week, is nearly impossible. Someone has to care for the livestock, and that someone is usually you. Return to the house now, animals tended and morning chores progressing on schedule, and you find the kitchen in full operation. Whether you're the one doing the cooking or watching someone else do it, this space demands attention, because the kitchen in the 1800s is the command centre of domestic life, a place where women, primarily, spend the majority of their waking hours transforming raw ingredients into edible food through an exhausting process of manual labour that modern people can scarcely imagine. The kitchen might be a separate room, or it might be one end of your main living space, or in some regions it might be a separate building entirely, designed to keep heat and fire risk away from the main dwelling. What it almost certainly isn't is a sleek, efficient workspace with running water, refrigeration and electric appliances. Your kitchen is hot, smoky, labour-intensive and dangerous, a place where serious injuries are common and where the work never, ever ends. The fireplace dominates, of course, we've talked about that already, but consider the specialised equipment arranged around it. There's a crane, a pivoting metal arm that swings pots over the fire or away from it, allowing for crude temperature control. There are hooks at various heights for hanging pots at different distances from the flame. There's a trammel, an adjustable hook that can raise or lower pots with precision. There's a Dutch oven, that heavy cast iron pot with the flanged lid designed for holding coals on top, creating an oven-like environment for baking bread or roasting meat. There's a spit for roasting, either hand-turned or operated by a mechanical device, and there's an assortment of long-handled tools, ladles, forks, pokers, designed to keep your hands away from the flames while you work. A woman in the 1800s spends an estimated 4 to 6 hours per day on food preparation alone. This doesn't count the time spent growing food, preserving food, hauling water for cooking, cleaning up after cooking, or any of the 1,000 other tasks that support the eating process. Just the actual cooking, building the fire, preparing ingredients, monitoring pots, serving meals, baking bread, consumes the majority of a woman's productive hours. Historians note that the phrase "women's work is never done" isn't hyperbole. It's a literal description of the domestic workload that most women carried. Bread baking occupies a special place in the kitchen hierarchy. Bread is the foundation of the American diet in the 1800s, more important than meat, more important than vegetables, the one food that appears at every meal and whose absence signals genuine hardship. Making bread requires flour, ground from wheat or corn or rye, liquid, water or milk, leavening, yeast, sourdough starter or chemical agents, and usually fat and salt. The process starts with mixing the dough, continues through a long period of kneading that develops the gluten and gives bread its structure, includes rising time while the yeast does its work, and culminates in baking, either in a Dutch oven by the fire, in a brick oven built into the fireplace, or in a freestanding bake oven if you're fortunate enough to have one. The whole bread process might take 4 to 6 hours from start to finish, which is why most households designate a specific baking day each week and produce multiple loaves at once. Baking day is exhausting. Fire must be built up and maintained at high heat, dough must be mixed and kneaded and shaped, timing must be carefully managed so loaves don't burn or emerge underdone. The results, when successful, are glorious. Fresh bread is perhaps the most universally beloved food in human history, but the labour to produce it is substantial. Here's something that might surprise you. Recipes, as we understand them, barely exist. Cookbooks are published, certainly, but they assume a level of knowledge that modern readers don't possess and often omit quantities, temperatures and timing entirely. A typical 1800s recipe might say, take some flour and a bit of water and work until the proper consistency, without specifying what some means or what proper consistency looks like. Cooking knowledge is transmitted primarily through oral tradition, mother to daughter, and you learn by watching, participating, and failing until you get it right. Beyond bread, the kitchen produces an endless stream of meals, preserves, and preparations. Meat must be cut and cooked properly to avoid foodborne illness. Undercooked pork can give you trichinosis, a parasitic infection that was common enough to be unremarkable. Vegetables must be cleaned and prepared, often by boiling until any texture is eliminated. The 1800s are not a great era for vegetable cuisine. Dairy must be processed before it spoils, milk into butter, into cheese, into clabber for baking. Every meal requires planning, preparation and attention, and by the time one meal is served and cleaned up, it's nearly time to start the next. The kitchen is also frankly dangerous. Open flames, boiling liquids, heavy cast iron, sharp knives, slippery floors. Accidents are common and sometimes serious. Burns are the most frequent injury, ranging from minor singes to devastating wounds that can become infected and prove fatal. Long skirts catching fire is a genuine hazard, and women learn to move carefully around the hearth, always aware of where their clothing is in relation to the flames. Children are particularly vulnerable, and households with small children must maintain constant vigilance to prevent curious hands from reaching into fires or pulling down pots. You might wonder why anyone would spend their entire adult life performing this kind of labour. The answer, of course, is that there's no choice. Eating is not optional, and someone has to do the work of transforming raw agricultural products into edible food. That someone in the 1800s is almost always a woman, and the work is simply expected, unquestioned, a fact of life as immutable as gravity. Historians still argue whether domestic work was valued in this era, respected even if unpaid, or whether it was dismissed as unskilled and unimportant. The answer probably varies by household, region, and individual attitude. The kitchen empties and fills throughout the day as meals are prepared and consumed. Morning might see a simple breakfast of the kind we discussed, but dinner, the midday meal, confusingly named to modern ears, and supper, the evening meal, both require their own preparation cycles. The work is continuous, one task flowing into the next, and the woman running the kitchen must manage time, resources and energy across all of it while also tending to children, maintaining the house, and handling whatever emergencies arise. If the kitchen is command central for daily operations, there's one particular day that elevates domestic labour from merely exhausting to absolutely brutal: laundry day. You've been dreading it all week, and now it's here, and the next 12 to 14 hours will be consumed by the single-minded pursuit of clean clothing, through means that make modern laundry look like a pleasant hobby. Laundry in the 1800s is not a chore, it's an ordeal. It's a marathon of boiling water, harsh chemicals, and relentless physical exertion that leaves you aching and raw by the time the last garment is hung to dry. The process hasn't changed much in centuries, and it won't change until electric washers arrive to liberate future generations from this particular form of suffering. You start by hauling water, a lot of water. Depending on the size of your household and the amount of dirty laundry accumulated, you might need 50 to 100 gallons of water to get through the day. Every gallon must be carried from the well or stream, poured into tubs and heated over the fire. Your shoulders are already complaining, and you haven't even started washing yet. The washing apparatus is simple: a large tub or kettle for boiling, a washboard for scrubbing, a stick or paddle for stirring, and your own 2 hands for everything else. The tub sits over or near the fire, filled with water that's heating toward a boil. While you wait, you sort the laundry. Whites separate from colours, heavily soiled items separate from lightly dirty ones, delicates set aside for gentler treatment. This sorting matters because the washing process is so harsh that mixing the wrong items will ruin something. Soap is your primary weapon against dirt. Lye soap, most likely, made at home from rendered fat and potash, potassium carbonate extracted from wood ashes. The making of soap is its own lengthy process, typically done once or twice a year in large batches, producing bars or soft soap that will last until the next soap-making session. Lye soap is effective. It cuts grease and removes grime with ruthless efficiency. But it's also harsh on skin and fabric alike. Your hands will be red and cracked by the end of laundry day, and the clothes will emerge clean but slightly degraded by each washing cycle. The actual washing proceeds in stages. First, heavily soiled items get a pre-treatment, soaking in cold water to loosen dirt, scrubbing on the washboard to attack specific stains, perhaps an application of extra soap to problem areas. The washboard is a ridged surface, usually metal or glass, against which you rub the fabric in a back-and-forth motion that mechanically dislodges dirt. It's effective, but it's murder on your knuckles, and the repetitive motion builds up a burning fatigue in your forearms that doesn't quit. Next, items go into the boiling water for a proper wash. You stir them with a stick or paddle, pushing them down into the hot water, agitating them to work the soap through the fabric. The steam rises around you, soaking you with sweat and humidity, and the smell of boiling laundry fills the air. Not unpleasant exactly, soapy and steamy, but intense after hours of exposure. You can't let the fire die during this stage, so you're also managing the flames, adding wood, adjusting the pot's position to maintain the right temperature. After washing comes rinsing, which requires more water, more hauling, more work. The soap must be removed completely, or it will leave the fabric stiff and irritating against the skin. You rinse once, twice, 3 times, wringing the water from each garment with your hands, twisting and squeezing until your grip threatens to give out. Some households have wringer devices, 2 rollers turned by a crank that squeeze water from fabric more efficiently than hands alone. But these cost money and many families manage without. Finally, the wrung-out laundry is hung to dry. Clotheslines stretch across your yard and you pin each item carefully, arranging them to catch the breeze and the sun. In good weather, clothing dries in a few hours. In poor weather, it might take a full day or more. Winter laundry is particularly challenging. Clothes hung outside might freeze solid before they dry, requiring retrieval and indoor drying that clutters your living space and adds moisture to the air. Here's a detail that often gets overlooked: ironing. Once dry, most clothing requires pressing with a heavy iron heated on the fire. The iron, actually several irons, rotated so one heats while one works, smooths wrinkles and gives garments a finished appearance, but it also kills lingering bacteria and parasites that might survive the washing process. Ironing takes hours of additional labour, standing at a board in a hot room, pressing heavy metal across every surface of every garment. Your back aches, your arm aches. The room is sweltering from the fire you need to keep the irons hot. The entire laundry process takes most of a day, 8 to 14 hours depending on the load and the available help. Households with daughters or servants divide the labour, making it more bearable if not actually pleasant. Households without such help, a young mother alone perhaps with small children underfoot, face a genuine crisis every laundry day, struggling to complete necessary work while also managing everything else that needs doing. Given this reality, you do laundry as infrequently as possible. Weekly is common for households with large loads. Every 2 weeks or even monthly isn't unusual for those with smaller families or fewer clothes. In between, you spot clean, brush, air out, and tolerate levels of dirtiness that modern standards would find unacceptable. Your clothes carry sweat and dirt and the accumulated odours of daily life, and this is simply normal. Everyone smells, more or less, and noses adjust to what's expected. Historians note that the introduction of the washing machine represents one of the most significant quality of life improvements in human history, primarily for women. The hours reclaimed from laundry labour enabled education, employment, leisure and participation in public life that was simply impossible when one day each week was consumed by this brutal physical work. You don't know this yet, of course. You know only that laundry day is here, the water is heating, and there's nothing to do but get started. The morning light is streaming full now, the household fully awake and operational, and somewhere in this bustling domestic scene are the children. Those small, noisy, essential members of the 1800s family unit who occupy a world dramatically different from modern childhood. If you're a child in this era, or if you're raising one, the experience is defined by labour, limited education, and a level of responsibility that would alarm any modern parent. Children in the 1800s begin contributing to household work almost as soon as they can walk. By age 4 or 5, you might be carrying small items, watching younger siblings, collecting eggs, or performing other tasks suited to little hands. By 7 or 8, you're hauling water, feeding animals, weeding gardens, and running errands. By 12, you're essentially a full working member of the household, capable of handling adult tasks with minimal supervision. The concept of childhood as a protected period of play and learning is largely a modern invention. In your time, children are small adults in training. This doesn't mean childhood is joyless. Play exists woven into the cracks between chores and responsibilities. Children run, climb, explore, invent games, form friendships, and engage in the imaginative activities that seem hardwired into human development. But play is unofficial, squeezed into margins, something you do when the work is done rather than something adults specifically facilitate. Toys are homemade or improvised. A ball stitched from rags, a doll made from corn husks, a hoop from a barrel rolled with a stick. Store-bought toys exist for wealthy urban children, but rural kids make do with what's available. Education is sporadic and seasonal. Schools exist, particularly in New England and the more settled regions, but attendance is far from universal. Rural schools operate primarily in winter, when farm labour demands are lowest and children can be spared from fieldwork. Summer sessions exist in some areas, but attendance drops sharply when planting and harvest require every available hand. The school year might total 3 to 4 months, broken into segments around the agricultural calendar. The schoolhouse itself is typically a single room, with one teacher managing students of all ages from approximately 6 to 16. Younger children learn their letters while older ones work on arithmetic. Everyone shares the same space, the same heating stove, the same limitations. Supplies are minimal, a slate and chalk for practicing writing, a few shared textbooks, perhaps a Bible, a speller, a reader, the teacher's own knowledge and patience. Learning to read, write, and perform basic arithmetic is the core curriculum. Anything beyond that is a luxury. Teachers in rural schools are often young, poorly paid, and minimally trained. Many are teenagers themselves, perhaps with a few more years of education than their students, boarding with local families and moving on after a term or two. Discipline can be harsh. Corporal punishment is standard and expected. But teachers also struggle to maintain authority over rooms full of students with varying attention spans and motivation levels. Historians still argue whether common schools of this era provided genuine education or merely basic literacy and social conformity. Here's something that might surprise modern readers. Literacy rates in the northern United States during the 1800s were actually quite high, probably exceeding 90% for white males, and not far behind for white females. The popular image of the illiterate frontier family is largely a myth. Most Americans could read at some functional level, even if their education ended with basic schooling. Reading was valued for practical and religious reasons. You needed to read the Bible, to understand contracts, to follow written instructions, and families sacrificed to ensure their children achieved at least minimal literacy. Girls' education follows different patterns than boys'. Domestic skills are prioritized: cooking, sewing, spinning, weaving, managing a household. Academic subjects are considered less important for girls, who will presumably become wives and mothers rather than merchants or professionals. This attitude limits options for many women, though some families, particularly those influenced by religious or reformist movements, provide daughters with education equal to or exceeding their sons. Notable female educators and writers of the era pushed against these limitations, arguing for women's intellectual equality, but progress is slow. For children not in school, the day is filled with work appropriate to age and gender. Boys gravitate toward outdoor tasks: fieldwork, animal care, woodcutting, repairs. Girls learn domestic skills alongside their mothers: cooking, cleaning, textile work, childcare. These roles are not absolute. Necessity often overrides gender expectations, and children help wherever they're needed. But the general pattern prepares children for the adult roles they're expected to assume. Infant mortality casts a shadow over everything. You probably know families who have lost children, most families have, and you understand viscerally that childhood is precarious. Diseases that modern medicine handles easily, measles, whooping cough, scarlet fever, diarrheal illness, kill children regularly, and every serious illness carries the possibility of death. Parents love their children fiercely, but that love is shadowed by an awareness of how easily death can come. Some historians argue that high infant mortality created emotional distance between parents and children. Others argue that it intensified attachment, making every moment precious. Probably both are true, varying by family and circumstance. Discipline in the 1800s. Household follows principles that would be considered harsh today. Physical punishment, spanking, switching, whipping, is normal and widely accepted. The phrase, spare the rod, spoil the child, is treated as genuine wisdom, and parents who fail to discipline are viewed as negligent. This doesn't mean parents are cruel. Most believe sincerely that firm discipline is necessary and loving, preparing children for a hard world. But the definition of acceptable discipline includes physical pain that modern standards would classify as abuse. Children's health depends on nutrition, exposure, and luck. Diseases spread easily in close quarters, and epidemics sweep through communities periodically, carrying off the young and vulnerable. Accidents are common. Burns from open fires, drowning in streams and wells, kicks from horses, falls from trees and barn lofts. Medical care is primitive by modern standards, and many childhood ailments that are now trivially treatable were then serious or fatal. Growing up in the 1800s is literally a matter of survival, and yet children grow. They learn, they work, they play when they can, they absorb the skills and values of their community, they prepare, consciously or not, for the adult roles they'll soon assume. Childhood is shorter in the 1800s, compressed by necessity and expectation, but it's still childhood, curious, energetic, occasionally defiant, and fundamentally hopeful. The morning chores are progressing, but a particular need has been building. You're running low on supplies, and that means a trip to the general store. This expedition isn't like running to the grocery store, a casual errand completed in 20 minutes. This is a half-day undertaking at minimum, requiring travel over rough roads, careful management of limited funds, and navigation of a social environment as complex as any you'll encounter. The general store sits in the nearest settlement, perhaps 3 to 5 miles away, close enough to reach in an hour or two by walking, faster by horse or wagon if you have access to either. The road connecting your farm to town is probably unpaved, a rutted track that becomes a muddy nightmare in wet weather and a dusty ordeal in dry. You've walked it dozens of times, know every turn and every trouble spot, and you set out with a sense of mild adventure mixed with the practical purpose of acquiring necessities. What do you need? Let's see. Salt, certainly. Salt is essential for preserving meat and flavouring food, and you can't produce it yourself. Sugar or molasses for sweetening, if you can afford it. Perhaps some coffee or tea, a luxury but one that makes life more bearable. Needles for sewing, thread, buttons to replace ones that have been lost. A small amount of wheat flour if your local corn isn't satisfying. Medicines, maybe. Patent medicines promising cure-all properties, or basic supplies like laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol for serious pain. Fabric, potentially, if you're planning a new garment. The list varies by season and circumstance, but the general pattern is consistent. You're buying what you cannot make or grow yourself. The store itself is a wonder of dense, cluttered inventory. Shelves line the walls, stacked with merchandise of every description. Barrels of nails and crackers sit on the floor. Bolts of fabric are displayed where customers can examine them. Glass jars contain candies for children who can convince their parents to spare a penny. The smell is unique and immediately recognisable, a mixture of leather, spices, coffee, kerosene, and a dozen other products mingling in the close air. The storekeeper is a significant figure in the community, someone who controls access to goods and extends credit to families who can't always pay cash. You know this person by name, have known them for years, and your relationship is both commercial and personal. The storekeeper knows your family's situation, your credit history, your habits and preferences. They might extend you credit against your expected harvest, recording debts in a ledger that functions as a primitive banking system. Or they might refuse credit if you've been unreliable, leaving you to manage with whatever cash you've brought. Payment in this era takes multiple forms. Cash is ideal but scarce. Actual money is often hard to come by for rural families, and significant purchases might be delayed until a crop is sold or work is completed. Barter is common. You might exchange eggs, butter, a bushel of corn, or other agricultural products for store goods. Store credit, as mentioned, carries purchases until settlement day. Some stores issue their own scrip, tokens redeemable for merchandise but not accepted elsewhere, a practice that can trap customers in cycles of debt. Here's a detail about prices that illuminates the era. Everything is negotiated. There are no fixed price tags in most general stores. Prices vary by season, supply, and the relationship between buyer and seller. A good customer might receive better prices than a stranger. Someone paying cash might get a discount compared to someone on credit. Bargaining is expected, and your ability to negotiate affects your family's economic well-being. The social dimension of the store visit is as important as the commercial one. This is where you catch up on news, exchange gossip, hear about neighbours' triumphs and troubles. The general store is the community's information hub, the place where news travels before newspapers reach your door, if newspapers reach your door at all. You might spend an hour or more at the store simply talking, learning what's happening in the wider world, sharing stories of your own. This social function explains why store visits can take so much time. You're not just shopping, you're participating in community life. Women and men often shop differently. Women make the bulk of domestic purchases, fabric, food supplies, household goods, and possess detailed knowledge of prices and quality. Men might handle larger purchases or those involving credit arrangements. Children come along as helpers, carrying packages and absorbing lessons about commerce and community. The whole family might make the trip together for particularly significant shopping expeditions. The journey home is often slower than the journey out. You're loaded with purchases now, bags and bundles, and sometimes heavy containers. If you've walked, you're carrying everything by hand or balanced on your shoulders. If you've brought a wagon, the goods pile in the back, rattling over the rough road. You might stop along the way to visit a neighbour, extending the trip further, or push straight home because there's work waiting. The goods you've purchased will last weeks or months, stretched carefully until the next store trip. Nothing is wasted. Everything serves its purpose until exhausted. The empty salt barrel is repurposed for storage. The fabric scraps become quilt pieces or patches. Even the string that tied packages is saved, coiled, and reused. Historians note that this conservation ethic, born of necessity, characterized American households until relatively recently in historical terms. By the time you return home, the sun has moved significantly across the sky, and part of your day is gone, spent on a single shopping errand that a modern person could complete in a fraction of the time. But your pantry is restocked, your household has what it needs for the coming weeks, and you've reconnected with your community in ways that matter for social cohesion and emotional well-being. The trip was worth it. The general store visit reminded you of something important: communication. You owe letters to relatives in Ohio, to a cousin who moved west last year, to a business contact about a potential transaction. Letter writing in the 1800s is the primary means of long-distance communication, the only way to stay connected with anyone beyond walking distance, and it carries a weight and significance that casual modern texting can't quite match. You find your writing materials, paper, pen and ink, and settle at the table to compose your correspondence. Paper is moderately expensive, and you write small to fit more words on each sheet. The pen is likely a quill or a steel-nibbed dip pen, requiring regular dipping in ink and careful handling to avoid blots and smears. Penmanship matters. A messy letter reflects poorly on you and may even be difficult to read. You take your time, forming each letter deliberately, occasionally consulting a dictionary or speller to verify uncertain words. What do you write about? Everything. Letters serve multiple functions in this era: maintaining family connections across distances, conducting business, sharing news, expressing emotion, and preserving records for the future. A letter to family might describe the health of household members, the progress of crops, local events and gossip, and wishes for the recipient's well-being. A business letter might negotiate terms, request information, or confirm arrangements. Either type follows conventions of format and courtesy that are taken seriously. The letter writing process takes time. You might spend 30 minutes to an hour on a single letter, thinking carefully about what to say and how to say it. Once finished, You let the ink dry, fold the paper carefully, envelopes aren't yet universal, and seal it, perhaps with wax, perhaps simply by tucking the folds. You address the outside with the recipient's name and location, hoping the information is sufficient for delivery. Mail service in the 1800s varies dramatically by location. Urban areas have regular postal routes and relatively reliable delivery. Rural areas depend on less frequent service, with mail perhaps arriving weekly or even less often. The postal system itself is expanding throughout the century, with standardized rates and improved infrastructure, but delivery times are still measured in weeks rather than days for any significant distance. A letter to family in another state might take 2 to 3 weeks to arrive. A letter to someone in California could take months if sent overland, or weeks if sent by ship around Cape Horn or, later, across Panama. Postage costs money. Before the introduction of the postage stamp in 1847, recipients often paid for delivery rather than senders, a system that could mean receiving mail you didn't want and couldn't afford. After stamps become standard, the cost falls on the sender, making it your responsibility to budget for communication. Rates vary by distance and weight, and people economize by writing densely, using thin paper, and crossing, writing horizontally across vertical text to fit more words without adding pages. The arrival of mail is an event. When the post rider comes or when someone returns from town with letters, the whole household gathers to hear the news. Letters are read aloud, shared, discussed, and often saved for rereading. Important letters are preserved for years, becoming family archives that historians now prize for their glimpses into everyday life. The anticipation while waiting for a response. Did your letter arrive? Will they write back? What news will they share? Is a particular emotional experience that instant communication has eliminated. Here's something that illustrates how different communication was. The telegraph exists by the 1840s, transmitting messages almost instantaneously across wires strung between cities. But telegraph service is expensive and brief, used primarily for urgent business or emergency communication. You don't telegraph casual news or lengthy thoughts. You pay by the word, and every word counts. The telegraph is transformative for certain purposes, news services, business coordination, wartime communication, while barely touching ordinary domestic life. Most people in your community have never sent a telegram and possibly never will. The telegraph is something that happens in cities, in newspapers, in a wider world that you hear about but don't directly experience. Your communication remains anchored in the familiar rhythms of paper and ink, of waiting and hoping, of news that arrives weeks after the events it describes. Newspapers provide another form of information flow, though their reach varies. Urban newspapers publish daily. Rural papers might appear weekly or not at all. Subscription costs money, and not everyone can afford it. Newspapers are shared, passed from household to household until they fall apart, their news growing stale but still valued. The content mixes political commentary, commercial information, local events, and whatever else the editor deems worthy. National news arrives late and filtered through multiple retellings. The overall effect is a communication environment that would feel impossibly slow to modern sensibilities. You don't know what's happening right now, anywhere. You know what was happening weeks ago in distant places, hours ago in nearby places, and you accept this temporal lag as simply how the world works. Breaking news, real-time updates, instant notification, these concepts don't exist. You live in a slower world where information moves at the speed of horses and boats, and increasingly, the mysterious speed of electrical signals that most people don't fully understand. Your letter's finished. You set them aside for the next trip to town, where you'll deliver them to the post office or hand them to someone travelling in the right direction. The words you've written will make their slow way across distances, carrying your thoughts and feelings and news to people you may not see for years. It's an act of faith, really, this sending of letters, trusting that they'll arrive, that they'll be read, that the connection they represent will be maintained across time and space. Today happens to be Sunday, which means the rhythm of your week shifts into something different. Slower, more communal, oriented around the church that serves as the centre of your community's social and spiritual life. The Sabbath is sacred, set apart from ordinary days, and what you do with it, and what you don't do with it, says much about your place in 1800s American society. Church attendance is expected, nearly universal in most communities, regardless of your personal feelings about religion. You might be a sincere believer, a skeptical participant, or someone who attends purely for social reasons. The specifics of your faith matter less than the public demonstration of belonging. Missing church without good reason invites comment and suspicion. What are you hiding? What are you doing instead? The community notices absences and draws conclusions. The church building itself is typically the finest structure in the community, built with care and pride, representing the collective investment of families who might otherwise live in relatively humble dwellings. A white clapboard structure with a steeple, perhaps, or a simple meeting house without ornamentation depending on the denomination. Pews arranged in rows, some congregations assigning seats by status or payment, others operating on a first-come basis. Windows that let in light but aren't necessarily glass in poorer communities. A pulpit from which the minister delivers sermons that can last 1, 2, sometimes 3 hours. You dress for church in your best clothes, the garments you've carefully preserved, worn only on Sundays and special occasions. This might be your one good suit, your one good dress, laundered and pressed and protected from the wear of daily labour. The contrast with everyday clothing is deliberate. You're presenting yourself differently, more formally, as an expression of respect for the sacred space and the community gathering within it. The walk or ride to church is itself a social event. You encounter neighbours heading the same direction, exchange greetings, fall into conversation. Children run ahead while adults walk behind, the whole procession moving toward the building where the community will gather. This weekly migration reinforces connections, reminds you who belongs to your world, creates opportunities for the casual interactions that bind communities together. Inside the church, you take your place and settle in for a long morning. Services in this era are not brief. The sermon alone might consume 90 minutes, a dense theological exploration that ranges from scripture interpretation to moral exhortation to practical guidance for daily life. The minister is one of the most educated people in the community, often the most educated, and sermons represent serious intellectual engagement with religious texts and ideas. Whether you find them inspiring, tedious, or somewhere in between probably depends on the particular minister and your own disposition. Singing is a central part of worship, though instruments may or may not be present depending on the denomination. Some churches consider musical instruments inappropriate for worship. Others employ an organ, or even a small ensemble. Hymns are sung from hymnals, each family perhaps owning their own copy, the congregation joining voices in songs that connect them to tradition and to each other. The sound of communal singing, harmonized or not, in tune or not, is a distinctive feature of the 1800s Sunday experience. Here's something that might surprise modern readers. Pew rental and assigned seating were common practices in many churches. Prominent families paid for the best pews, near the front or in positions of visibility, while poorer families sat in back or in designated areas. This economic stratification within sacred space reflected and reinforced the social hierarchies of the broader community. Historians still argue whether such practices represented a betrayal of Christian egalitarian ideals or simply a practical accommodation to social reality. After the formal service, the social dimension intensifies. People linger in the churchyard, talking, catching up on news, arranging business, conducting the informal negotiations that sustain community life. This is where you learn who's sick, who's had a baby, who's looking to sell a horse or buy a cow. Young people use the opportunity to see each other in supervised settings, the beginnings of courtships that might lead to marriages. The minister circulates, greeting parishioners, offering counsel, reinforcing their role as spiritual leader and community anchor. Sunday dinner is often a special meal, more elaborate than weekday fare, prepared the day before to minimize work on the Sabbath itself. Some denominations interpret Sabbath restrictions strictly, forbidding work of any kind. Others are more lenient. Either way, Sunday has a different feel than other days, quieter, more reflective, a pause in the relentless rhythm of labour that characterises the rest of the week. The afternoon might be spent in further visiting, in quiet family time, in reading, scripture certainly, but also other literature if available and acceptable. Children are expected to be calmer, better behaved, less rambunctious than on weekdays. The Sabbath is for rest and reflection, and even if you're not particularly religious yourself, the cultural expectation shapes your behaviour. By evening you're home again, the Sunday rhythm winding down, preparing for the week ahead. Tomorrow the regular schedule resumes. Early rising, animal chores, field work, domestic labour. But for one day, at least, the pace has slowed, the community has gathered, and something beyond mere survival has been acknowledged. The church's role extends beyond Sunday services. It provides education through Sunday schools, charity through organised aid to struggling families, governance through its influence on community standards, and meaning through its framing of life's great questions. For many Americans in the 1800s, the church is the most important institution in their lives, shaping worldview, behaviour, and relationships in ways that secular modernity has difficulty comprehending. The week proceeds, each day bringing its own labours, and inevitably someone in your household falls ill. It might be a child with a fever, a spouse with a persistent cough, yourself with an ache that won't fade. Illness in the 1800s is a different experience than illness today, scarier in some ways, more mysterious certainly, and managed with a combination of folk remedies, patent medicines, and professional care that would alarm any modern physician. The first response to illness is usually home treatment. Your family has accumulated a store of knowledge about which remedies work for which ailments, passed down through generations and supplemented by neighbours' advice and published medical guides. Fever might be treated with willow bark tea, containing salicin, a natural aspirin relative, cold compresses, and careful monitoring. Coughs might call for honey and herbs, mustard plasters on the chest, or steaming with aromatic plants. Digestive troubles might prompt purging with castor oil or other laxatives, or settling with plain broths and rest. The medicine chest in your home probably contains several patent medicines, those mysterious bottles and tins promising to cure everything from headaches to consumption. Patent medicines are a huge industry in the 1800s, marketed through aggressive advertising and testimonial, and their contents range from harmless to actively dangerous. Many contain alcohol in significant quantities, making them popular with people seeking socially acceptable intoxication. Others contain opiates. Laudanum is basically opium dissolved in alcohol, providing genuine pain relief along with the risk of addiction. A few contain mercury, arsenic, or other toxic substances that do more harm than good. Laudanum deserves special mention because it's so widely used and so casually accepted. Available without prescription at any general store, laudanum is the go-to remedy for pain, cough, diarrhea, menstrual cramps, teething babies, and pretty much anything else that causes distress. It works, in the sense that it dulls pain and induces calm, but regular use creates physical dependence, and many respectable 1800 citizens are functional opiate addicts without ever realizing the nature of their condition. Historians note that opioid addiction was common and largely unrecognized in this era, treated as weakness of character rather than medical dependency. If home remedies fail, professional medical care is an option, but professional means something different than it does today. Physicians exist, certainly, trained in medical schools of varying quality and practicing according to theories that range from somewhat accurate to completely wrong. The dominant medical theory for much of the 1800s is heroic medicine, which holds that aggressive intervention, bleeding, purging, blistering, helps the body overcome disease. If you're seriously ill and see a physician, you might be bled, opening a vein to drain blood, dosed with calomel, mercury chloride, a powerful purgative, or blistered, applying irritants to raise blisters, supposedly drawing disease to the surface. These treatments often make patients worse. Bleeding weakens people who are already weak from illness. Mercury is toxic and accumulates in the body. Purging depletes fluids and nutrients. Historians still argue whether heroic medicine shortened more lives than it saved, and the consensus leans toward net harm for many conditions. This helps explain why many people preferred to avoid physicians entirely, trusting home remedies and patient care over professional intervention. Alternative medical systems flourish alongside conventional medicine. Homeopathy, with its extremely diluted remedies, is popular partly because the treatments do no harm. The water and sugar solutions don't cure anything, but they also don't kill you. Thomsonianism advocates botanical remedies and steam treatments, rejecting the bleeding and purging of conventional practice. Various folk healing traditions offer their own approaches, often incorporating religious or spiritual elements. The medical marketplace of the 1800s is diverse, confusing, and largely unregulated. Hospitals exist but are primarily for the desperately poor. Respectable people are cared for at home, nursed by family members through whatever illness strikes. The sick room is a familiar feature of household life, a space where the ill person rests while family members rotate through caretaking duties. Women bear the primary burden of nursing, adding healthcare to their already overwhelming domestic responsibilities. Mortality statistics tell the grim story. Life expectancy in the 1800s hovers around 40 years, dragged down by high infant and child mortality. If you survive childhood, you might live to a reasonable age, but the risk of dying from infection, accident, or disease in prime adulthood remains significant. Mothers die in childbirth, workers die from injuries, everyone is vulnerable to the epidemics that sweep through communities periodically. What you know about disease causation is largely wrong. The germ theory of disease won't be widely accepted until later in the century, and in the meantime, miasma, bad air from rotting matter, is blamed for illness. This theory isn't entirely useless. Avoiding foul-smelling places often means avoiding disease sources. But it leads to mistaken interventions. Opening windows for fresh air helps, but the mechanism isn't what people think, and missed preventive opportunities, hand washing, water purification, isolation of the sick. When someone in your family is ill, you do your best. You provide comfort, warmth, fluids, rest. You pray, if that's your inclination. You try the remedies you know, hope they work, and wait. Much of medicine in this era is simply waiting for the body to heal itself, waiting for the fever to break, waiting for recovery or decline. The outcome depends on factors you don't understand and can't control, and you live with that uncertainty as one of the many background anxieties of 1800s life. Summer is fading now, the days growing shorter, and your thoughts turn to a challenge that has defined human existence since the first cold winter: food preservation. Without refrigeration, without freezers, without the ability to simply buy fresh food year-round, you must prepare for the months ahead when nothing grows and the snow lies deep. The work of preservation, smoking, salting, pickling, drying, is intensive, time-sensitive, and absolutely essential for survival. The root cellar is your first line of defense against winter hunger. Dug into the earth beneath or beside your house, it maintains a cool, stable temperature year-round, roughly 50 to 60 degrees in most regions, and stores vegetables that keep well in these conditions. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, beets, onions, cabbages. These root vegetables form the foundation of your winter diet, layered in bins or packed in sand or straw to extend their usable life. A well-stocked root cellar can feed a family for months. Preservation begins at harvest and extends through early winter. Each crop requires different treatment. Beans are dried on the vine and shelled for storage. Corn is similarly dried, either on the cob or as kernels that can be ground into meal throughout the winter. Squash and pumpkins can last for months in proper conditions, their hard shells protecting the flesh within. Apples are stored carefully, each fruit separated from its neighbours to prevent one spoiled apple from ruining the rest. Pickling offers another preservation method, using vinegar's acidity to create an environment hostile to the bacteria that cause spoilage. Cucumbers become pickles, of course, but almost any vegetable can be pickled. Beans, beets, peppers, cabbage, as sauerkraut. The process involves preparing the vegetables, heating vinegar with salt and spices, packing everything in jars or crocks, and sealing against contamination. Done correctly, pickled foods last through the winter and beyond. Meat preservation is critical and labour-intensive. A pig slaughtered in late fall provides food for months, but only if the meat is properly preserved. Salt is the primary tool. Hams, bacon, and pork shoulders are packed in salt or submerged in brine, drawing moisture from the meat and creating conditions where bacteria can't survive. The salting process takes weeks, and the resulting meat keeps for months. Hard, chewy, intensely salty, but edible and nutritious. Smoking adds flavour and further extends preservation. A smokehouse, a small outbuilding designed for this purpose, allows controlled exposure to wood smoke over extended periods. Hams hang in the smokehouse for weeks, slowly absorbing the preservative compounds in smoke, while developing the distinctive flavour that defines country ham. Different woods produce different flavours. Hickory for the classic taste, apple for sweetness, oak for robustness. Drying works for certain foods, removing moisture until what remains is shelf-stable. Dried apples, strung on thread and hung in a warm place, become a concentrated source of sweetness and nutrition that reconstitutes when cooked. Jerky, thin strips of meat dried until hard, provides portable, long-lasting protein. Herbs are dried for medicine and flavouring. The principle is simple. Bacteria need moisture to survive, and dried food is inhospitable territory. Dairy presents special challenges. Milk spoils quickly without refrigeration, so it must be processed immediately into more stable forms. Butter, churned from cream, keeps reasonably well in cool conditions and provides essential fat through the winter. Cheese, curdled and aged, becomes more stable as it matures and can last for months or years depending on the variety. Fresh milk is available only when cows are producing, which varies seasonally, so preserved dairy products fill the gaps. Here's something interesting about preservation timing. Slaughtering typically happens in late fall or early winter, when natural cold helps preserve meat during the initial processing period. This is why hog killing time is a full tradition in American farming communities. You need cool weather but not yet frozen ground, a window of optimal conditions that varies by region. Neighbours often cooperate in slaughtering, sharing labour and sometimes sharing meat, reinforcing community bonds while accomplishing essential work. The work of preservation falls heavily on women, adding to the already overwhelming domestic labour of the household. Pickling, canning, as the century progresses, drying vegetables, processing dairy, all of this happens alongside regular cooking, cleaning, childcare and other responsibilities. The fall months are particularly brutal, with preservation work layering onto harvest work, and exhaustion is the norm rather than the exception. Storage management continues through the winter. Root cellars must be checked regularly for spoilage, with damaged items removed before they contaminate their neighbours. Meat must be monitored for signs of deterioration. Preserves must be used in proper rotation, older stores consumed before newer ones. This careful management determines whether your family eats reasonably well through March, or faces genuine hunger before the first spring greens appear. The psychological weight of winter preparation is real. You know that a poor harvest, inadequate preservation, or unexpected loss can mean genuine hunger. You've seen it happen to neighbours, and the fear of insufficient food drives the frantic work of fall preservation. When the cellar is full and the smokehouse is stocked, you feel a measure of security that modern people, with grocery stores always available, simply don't experience. Food security means something different when you've personally grown, preserved, and stored everything you'll eat for the next 6 months. The sun has set, the day's labour is finally finished, and the family gathers in the main room of your house for what passes as evening entertainment. There are no screens to watch, no radios to listen to, no devices to scroll through. There's firelight, conversation, music if someone can play, stories if someone can tell them, and the simple comfort of being together after a long day's work. Evening entertainment in the 1800s is participatory, communal, and, perhaps surprisingly, genuinely enjoyable. The fireplace provides the setting. Its warmth gathers the family close. Its flickering light creates an intimate atmosphere. Its sound provides a background rhythm of crackle and pop. You might have a candle or two lit for additional illumination, but many evenings proceed by firelight alone, which is dim by modern standards but sufficient for most activities. Your eyes have adjusted to low-light conditions, and you function perfectly well in an environment that would have modern people reaching for switches. Conversation is the primary entertainment. You talk about the day's work, the neighbours' doings, plans for tomorrow, memories of the past. Children report on their adventures. Parents share wisdom and stories. Everyone participates in the ongoing narrative of family life. These conversations serve practical purposes, coordinating work, transmitting knowledge, reinforcing relationships, while also filling the evening hours with human connection. Storytelling occupies a special place in this oral culture. People who can tell stories well are valued community members, invited to gatherings, sought out for their ability to transport listeners to other times and places. Stories might be traditional, folk tales passed down through generations, ghost stories that send shivers down children's spines, moral tales that reinforce community values, or they might be personal, accounts of adventures, mishaps, encounters with notable people or dangerous animals. Either way, the storyteller's art creates entertainment from nothing more than words and imagination. Music is equally important. Instruments vary by region and economic status. Fiddles are common, especially in areas settled from the British Isles. Banjos appear increasingly, especially in regions influenced by African American musical traditions. Harmonicas are cheap and portable. Pianos represent wealth and aspirations to refinement. Someone in your family probably plays something, or at least tries to. An evening might include music ranging from accomplished performances to endearing attempts. Singing is universal. Hymns learned at church, folk songs passed through communities, work songs, love songs, comic songs. The repertoire is vast and everyone participates. Some families sing in harmony, parts learned through repetition until the blend comes naturally. Children learn songs from parents who learned them from their parents, creating threads of musical tradition that stretch back generations. Reading aloud is another common evening activity, particularly in families with education and access to books. One person reads while others listen, sharing the cost of candle or lamplight while everyone benefits from the content. The Bible is most common. Many families read a chapter each evening as a spiritual practice, but novels, newspapers, and magazines also get this treatment. Serial novels, published in installments, create ongoing entertainment across weeks or months. Games provide diversion, especially for children, but adults participate too. Card games require only a deck of cards, which are cheap and durable. Board games exist: checkers, chess, backgammon, though specialised equipment may be homemade or improvised. Word games, memory games, guessing games require nothing but participants and imagination. Riddles circulate through communities, passed from person to person, providing brief entertainment and mental challenge. Here's a detail that illustrates the era's different relationship with entertainment. Boredom was considered a moral failing rather than a circumstance to be remedied. You were expected to find interest and occupation, to improve yourself during idle moments, to treat leisure as opportunity rather than emptiness. This attitude shaped how people approached evening hours, seeking activity and engagement rather than passive reception. Handicrafts fill many evening hours, particularly for women. Knitting, sewing, mending. These tasks continue regardless of light conditions because the hands know the work. A woman might knit stockings while listening to reading aloud, her fingers moving automatically while her mind engages with the story. Men might whittle or work leather or maintain tools. The distinction between work and leisure blurs. Evening activities are often productive in addition to pleasant. Visitors might join the family gathering, neighbours stopping by for an evening's company. This kind of casual dropping in is common and expected. Hospitality is a social obligation, and turning away a neighbour without offering rest and refreshment would be considered rude. Visitors bring news from beyond your immediate circle, stories from their own experience, fresh perspectives on familiar topics. The social network weaves itself tighter with each visit. The evening winds down gradually. Children drift towards sleep, heads nodding despite efforts to stay awake. Adults finish their conversations, bank the fire for overnight, prepare for the brief transition between waking and sleeping. Someone might say a prayer, asking for protection through the night, giving thanks for the day's blessings. Then, one by one, the household members find their beds, and the house grows quiet, lit only by the glow of coals in the fireplace. This is what entertainment meant before electricity. Participation rather than consumption, community rather than isolation, creativity rather than reception. It's not better or worse than modern entertainment, just different, shaped by different technological realities and different social expectations. And in its own way, on its own terms, it was often genuinely enjoyable. The evening entertainments we've discussed have a specific social function, particularly for young people. They provide opportunities for courtship, for the carefully choreographed dance of getting to know potential romantic partners within the bounds of community expectation. Finding a spouse in the 1800s is serious business, shaped by economic considerations, family involvement, and rituals that seem both charming and restrictive by modern standards. The first thing to understand is that marriage in this era is as much an economic partnership as a romantic one. A good spouse brings resources, skills, and connections that benefit the combined household. A bad choice can mean years of struggle and regret. Parents are therefore heavily involved in guiding, some would say controlling, their children's romantic choices, steering them towards suitable matches and away from unsuitable ones. Love matters certainly, but love alone is not sufficient basis for marriage. Courting follows established patterns. A young man interested in a young woman approaches her father, not her, to ask permission to call on her, essentially requesting permission to visit and get to know her. If the father approves, after considering the young man's character, family prospects and situation, the courtship begins. The young woman has some voice in this process. She can discourage or encourage the suitor's attentions, but the framework is one of parental oversight and community involvement, not individual choice. Calling involves formal visits to the young woman's home, conducted in the presence of family members who serve as chaperones. You might sit in the parlour if the family has one, making conversation while parents or older siblings monitor from nearby. Privacy is limited. The point is to get acquainted within safe boundaries. Conversations reveal character, values, sense of humour, intelligence, the qualities that matter for a lifetime of partnership. Physical contact is minimal, a handshake perhaps, or an offered arm when walking. Community events provide additional opportunities for supervised interaction. Dances are particularly important. Those barn dances and social gatherings where young people can interact in a structured environment, watched by the entire community but given some space to converse and display their charms. The ability to dance well is a genuine social asset. Lessons are common, and competence on the dance floor signals refinement and social awareness. Church gatherings, quilting bees, barn raisings, harvest festivals. All of these events include a courting dimension, providing occasions for young people to observe each other, converse briefly, and develop impressions that inform later courtship decisions. The community functions as a vast, informal matchmaking system, with older members paying attention to which young people seem well suited and dropping appropriate hints. Here's something interesting about 1800s courtship: bundling. In some communities, particularly those with Dutch or German heritage, courting couples were allowed to share a bed, fully clothed, sometimes with a bundling board between them, for conversation and companionship during long winter evenings. This practice shocks modern sensibilities, but was considered acceptable in its cultural context, a way to allow intimacy while maintaining nominal boundaries. Historians still argue about how common bundling was and whether the practice was actually as chaste as its proponents claimed. Engagement follows successful courtship, announced to the community and marking the transition from potential couple to committed pair. The engagement period might last months or years, depending on circumstances, and includes preparation for establishing a new household. The bride-to-be prepares linens, clothing, and household goods, her hope chest or trousseau, while the groom-to-be works toward the economic foundation needed to support a family. Breaking an engagement is serious business, potentially damaging to reputation and future prospects. The wedding itself is typically a community event, though specifics vary by denomination, region, and economic status. A church ceremony followed by a gathering at someone's home is common. Gifts of household goods help the new couple establish themselves. Feasting and celebration mark the occasion. The wedding night might be the first time the couple is truly alone together, depending on how strictly courtship was supervised. After marriage, the partnership begins in earnest. Women's lives typically narrow to the domestic sphere: house, children, household production, while men focus on external work: farming, trade, public business. This division is not absolute, but is expected and largely enforced by social pressure. A woman's reputation, and therefore her family's reputation, depends on conforming to appropriate gender roles. Stepping outside these bounds invites criticism and possible ostracism. Marriage for love is increasingly valued as the century progresses, part of broader cultural shifts toward individual choice and emotional fulfillment. But practical considerations never disappear entirely, and most successful marriages blend affection with economic partnership. The romantic ideal and the practical reality coexist, sometimes comfortably and sometimes in tension. Failed marriages are difficult to exit. Divorce exists but carries enormous stigma, particularly for women, and legal processes are complicated and expensive. Most unhappy couples simply endure, making the best of a difficult situation or living in open unhappiness. Spousal abuse, while deplored in principle, is often tolerated in practice, with women having few options for escape. The stakes of courtship are therefore quite high. You're not just choosing a partner for Saturday nights. You're choosing the person you'll live and work with for decades, the parent of your children, your economic partner in survival. The elaborate rituals and community oversight that surround courtship reflect these stakes, an attempt to guide young people toward choices they and their families can live with for a lifetime. Step outside and look at your house. Really look at it, and you'll see a structure that represents enormous investment of labour, resources, and community cooperation. Building a home in the 1800s is not a matter of hiring contractors and waiting for completion. It's a deeply personal undertaking, often involving your own hands alongside those of neighbours, and the result, for better or worse, is distinctly yours. Your house is probably built of wood, the abundant material that makes American construction possible. In regions with plentiful forests, log construction remains common, particularly for first-generation dwellings on new land. Logs are notched at the corners and stacked to form walls, the gaps between them chinked with mud or mortar. A log cabin can be raised relatively quickly with cooperative labour, providing basic shelter while more permanent structures are planned. Frame construction becomes increasingly standard as communities develop sawmills capable of producing lumber in quantity. This method involves a skeletal frame of timber beams, covered with exterior siding and interior walls. The frame is raised in sections, often through community barn raisings where neighbours gather to lift heavy timbers into place, work that requires many hands and creates strong social bonds. The image of neighbours helping neighbours build is not sentimental myth, it's practical necessity in a world where construction machinery doesn't exist. Stone or brick construction appears in more established areas, particularly for those with resources to purchase materials and hire specialised labour. These materials offer durability, fire resistance, and status. A brick house proclaims prosperity in a way that wooden structures cannot. But the expense limits stone and brick to a relatively small portion of American dwellings. Inside, your house is probably simpler than you might imagine. A main room serves multiple functions: cooking, eating, working, socialising. Sleeping might happen in the same room or in a separate area, depending on the size and layout of your dwelling. Privacy as we understand it barely exists. Family members share space in ways that modern sensibilities would find uncomfortable. A large family might crowd into 2 or 3 rooms with several people sharing each bed. Furniture is sturdy and functional, much of it locally made or even homemade. Tables, chairs, bedsteads, chests. These basic pieces provide the necessities of daily life without much attention to style or comfort. Cushions and upholstery are relatively rare in ordinary households. You sit on hard wooden surfaces that would horrify your modern back. The wealthy have more elaborate furnishings, imported or crafted by skilled artisans, but most Americans make do with basics. Maintenance never ends. Wooden structures require constant attention. Roofs need patching, walls need sealing, floors need repair. A house left unattended deteriorates rapidly, and the work of maintaining your dwelling is woven into daily and seasonal routines. You might spend winter evenings making repairs, summer Saturdays working on larger projects, always aware that neglect costs more in the long run than consistent care. Heating your house centres on the fireplace, as we've discussed, but the fireplace heats only its immediate vicinity. Rooms distant from the fire remain cold in winter, and you arrange your activities to stay near warmth. Sleeping might mean huddling under heavy blankets in a room cold enough to see your breath. The fire dies down overnight, and the chill settles in. Wealthy households have multiple fireplaces, heating different areas. Ordinary households manage with one and accept the temperature gradients. Here's a detail that reveals the era's different standards. Insulation is minimal or absent. Walls might have air gaps, but rarely any material designed to retain heat. Windows leak cold air around their edges. Doors fit imperfectly. The energy you pour into heating largely escapes through these countless gaps, requiring more fuel to maintain livable temperatures. This inefficiency is simply accepted. The technology for better construction exists but isn't widely implemented. Building improvements happen over time. A family might start with a minimal structure and expand it as resources allow, adding a room when children come, improving the fireplace as better designs become available, finally enclosing that porch that's always been drafty. Your house is a work in progress, reflecting years of accumulated effort and adjustment. The sounds of your house are distinctive. Creaking timbers settling, wind whistling through gaps, the scurry of mice in walls, mice are nearly universal and mostly tolerated, the crackle of fire, the footsteps of family members on bare floors. You know these sounds intimately, can distinguish normal from unusual, and they form the acoustic backdrop of your life. Pride in your house is real. However humble, it's yours, built or maintained with your own labour, the centre of your family life. When you improve it, add a window, build a better chimney, finish an interior surface, you're investing in your own security and comfort. The house shelters you from weather, hosts your family's daily activities, stores your accumulated possessions. It's not just a structure, it's home, with all that word implies. Sometime this week you need to travel, perhaps to the next town for business, perhaps to visit relatives a day's journey away, perhaps for some opportunity that requires leaving your immediate area. Travel in the 1800s is neither quick nor comfortable, and the journey itself becomes a significant undertaking that shapes your plans and demands your attention. If you're walking, which is common for short distances, expect to cover perhaps 3 to 4 miles per hour on decent roads, less on rough terrain. A 10-mile journey means 3 to 4 hours of walking, which might be manageable for a day trip but becomes exhausting over longer distances. US shoes designed more for durability than comfort. Carry whatever you need in bags or bundles, and accept that you'll arrive tired, dusty, and probably footsore. Horses transform travel for those who can afford them. On horseback, you might manage 25 to 35 miles in a day, covering distances that would take days on foot. The horse needs care, of course. Feeding, watering, resting, and travel still means hours in the saddle, arriving stiff and sore. Not everyone rides well, and learning to manage a horse comfortably takes time and practice. Women rarely ride astride in this era. Side saddle is considered appropriate, which is more precarious and requires specialised equipment. Wagons and carriages offer another option, providing transport for people and goods together. A farm wagon is slow but steady, perhaps covering 15 to 20 miles in a day over decent roads. Carriages designed for passenger comfort move faster but cost more to acquire and maintain. Either way, you're subject to the condition of the roads, which are often terrible. Roads in 1800s America range from reasonably maintained turnpikes to barely passable tracks through wilderness. The quality depends on location, season, and the investment that local communities have made in road building. Even major roads might become impassable mud pits during wet weather or dusty ordeals in dry periods. Bridges are unreliable, fords through streams are common. Getting stuck, lost, or delayed is simply part of the travel experience. Travel brings hazards beyond mere inconvenience. Robbers target travellers, particularly those appearing prosperous. Violence is a real risk on isolated roads. Weather can turn dangerous, especially for travellers caught in storms without shelter. Injury or illness far from home means relying on the kindness of strangers, who may or may not provide adequate help. You carry weapons if you can, travel in groups when possible, and accept a level of risk that would concern modern travellers. Accommodations along the way vary tremendously. Taverns and inns provide lodging for travellers, offering beds, often shared with strangers, meals, and stabling for horses. The quality ranges from relatively comfortable to genuinely appalling. Bed bugs, bad food, questionable company. You take what's available and hope for the best. Private hospitality is another option. Travellers might request lodging from farmers along the route, offering payment or work in exchange for a night's shelter. Here's an interesting aspect of 1800s travel. Letter of introduction. If you're travelling to unfamiliar areas, you might carry letters from respected community members, vouching for your character and requesting hospitable treatment. These letters open doors, establish trust, and smooth your way through communities where you're otherwise unknown. The practice reflects both the importance of reputation and the challenges of establishing trust with strangers. River travel offers an alternative to roads in many regions. Flatboats, keelboats, and, increasingly steamboats, carry passengers and freight along major waterways. Water travel is often faster and more comfortable than road travel, though it's limited to river corridors and subject to seasonal variations in water level. The Mississippi and Ohio rivers become major highways of commerce and migration, connecting interior regions to coastal ports. The railroad is revolutionizing travel as the century progresses, offering speed and reliability that previous transportation couldn't match. By mid-century, rail networks are expanding rapidly, and travelers with access to trains can cover distances in hours that would have taken days by other means. But rail service is concentrated along established routes, primarily in the northeast, and spreading outward. Rural areas remain dependent on horses and feet. Travel time shapes everything about your world. News travels slowly because people travel slowly. Economic activity is constrained by the difficulty of moving goods. Communities remain relatively isolated because reaching other communities requires significant effort. The map of your life is small by modern standards. Your immediate area is familiar. Anywhere more than a day's travel away is essentially foreign territory that you might visit rarely or never. When you return from your journey, tired, perhaps aching, certainly relieved to be home, you've accomplished something that modern people would barely notice. The miles you've covered represent real effort, real time, real planning. Travel has weight and significance in a way that disappears when transportation becomes quick and easy. Home looks good because getting there was work. Not everyone lives on farms, of course. While most Americans in the early 1800s are rural, urban areas are growing rapidly, and life in emerging towns and cities offers a different experience, one that includes developments that hint at electricity's eventual arrival. If you venture into a substantial town, you encounter a world that seems almost magical compared to rural darkness. Cities have gas lighting. Starting in the 1810s and expanding through the century, gas manufactured from coal is piped through urban streets to light lamps, storefronts, and eventually private homes. Walking down a gaslit street at night is revelatory. The steady, bright illumination transforms public spaces, extending usable hours and enabling nightlife that rural areas can't imagine. Theatres, restaurants, shops, all can operate after dark, creating an urban culture distinct from the early-to-bed rhythms of the countryside. The brightness is startling if you're used to candles and firelight. Gas lamps produce light equivalent to multiple candles, and the steady burn, unlike flickering flames, enables reading, working and socialising in ways that rural lighting can't match. Wealthy urban homes install gas lighting systems, bringing the technology indoors and liberating residents from candle management. The smell of gas is distinctive. Not unpleasant exactly, but different, and the slight hiss of gas flow becomes the background sound of urban evenings. Running water is another urban advance. While rural households haul every drop they use, cities develop waterworks that pipe water through mains to fountains, fire hydrants, and eventually private connections. The technology is imperfect. Pipes leak, pressure varies, quality is sometimes questionable, but the convenience is transformative. Urban residents can wash, cook, and clean without hauling water from wells. Indoor plumbing becomes possible, and the first flush toilets appear in wealthy homes. Sewage systems develop alongside water systems, though implementation lags behind in most cities. The combination of running water and inadequate sewage creates significant public health problems, and cholera epidemics periodically devastate urban populations. But the trajectory is toward improvement, toward infrastructure that manages waste more effectively than privy pits ever could. Urban economies offer employment that doesn't depend on land ownership. Factories are expanding, particularly in New England and the Middle Atlantic states, producing textiles, machinery, and a growing variety of manufactured goods. Factory work is brutal by modern standards. Long hours, low pay, dangerous conditions, but it provides income for people who might otherwise have no options. Young women in particular find factory employment an alternative to domestic service, earning wages, however meagre, and tasting independence. Commerce concentrates in cities, with shops offering variety that rural general stores can't match. Department stores emerge later in the century, presenting goods of all kinds under one roof. Specialised shops serve particular needs: booksellers, clothiers, apothecaries, jewellers. The urban consumer experiences abundance relative to rural scarcity, and develops expectations that manufacturers and merchants scramble to meet. Cities are also cultural centres. Theatres present performances ranging from Shakespeare to popular melodrama. Museums collect and display art, natural specimens and curiosities. Libraries offer access to books that few individuals could afford to own. Lecture halls host speakers on topics from temperance to science to reform movements. If you're hungry for culture beyond what your community provides, cities offer sustenance. Here's the trade-off. Cities are crowded, noisy, dirty, and dangerous. Population density enables the spread of disease, and epidemics strike urban areas harder than rural regions. Crime is more common and more varied. Fire danger is extreme, with entire neighbourhoods sometimes consumed by flames spreading through packed wooden structures. Air quality suffers from coal smoke, industrial emissions, and the accumulated waste of thousands of residents and their animals. Housing in cities ranges from elegant townhouses for the wealthy to cramped tenements for the poor. Workers' housing is often shocking by any standard. Families crowded into single rooms, sharing facilities with dozens of neighbours, light and air in short supply. The contrast with rural poverty is perhaps one of density more than absolute deprivation. But urban poverty carries its own particular miseries. The railroad depots that mark urban centres connect cities to each other and to the countryside. Goods flow in and out. People arrive seeking opportunity or flee seeking escape. Cities pulse with energy that rural areas can't match. The energy of concentrated humanity, of commerce and culture and constant movement. Whether this energy feels exciting or exhausting depends on your temperament and your circumstances. For rural residents visiting cities, the experience is both thrilling and disorienting. Everything is faster, louder, brighter, more complex. The pace of life seems accelerated, and the social rules are different. Urban sophisticates might look down on country visitors, while country folks might view urbanites as corrupt or artificial. The urban-rural divide, familiar in our own time, has deep roots in American culture. By century's end, electricity will arrive to transform cities further still, but already gaslighting and running water are changing urban life in ways that anticipate electric modernity. The future is arriving in cities first, as it usually does, while the countryside continues patterns that haven't changed fundamentally in generations. The calendar turns, seasons shift, and throughout the year your community marks time with celebrations, traditions, and collective rituals that bind people together and provide relief from ordinary labour. These seasonal celebrations are not merely fun, though they are fun, but serve important social functions, reinforcing relationships, transmitting culture, and providing structure to the year. Harvest festivals mark the end of agricultural labour and the beginning of the season when stored food sustains life. These gatherings combine thanksgiving, gratitude for successful harvest, with celebration, relief that the hardest work is done, and often include communal eating, drinking, music and dancing. The work of harvest itself has social dimensions. Neighbours help neighbours bring in crops, and the barn dance or harvest supper rewards collective effort. Quilting bees bring women together for work that is also socialisation. A quilt is a significant undertaking, days of labour for a single person, and spreading the work among many hands speeds completion while creating opportunity for conversation, storytelling, and relationship building. The host provides food, the guests provide labour and companionship. Everyone benefits from the exchange. Similar work parties serve other purposes: husking bees for corn, apple paring bees, wool spinning parties. Barn raisings represent community cooperation at its most visible. When a family needs a barn, neighbours gather to erect the structure in a single intensive day of labour. Men do the heavy lifting while women prepare food for the workers. Children run and play in the excitement. The barn that results represents not just the owning family's resources, but the community's willingness to help its members. You participate knowing that when your turn comes, others will reciprocate. Religious holidays punctuate the year with spiritual significance. Christmas is gaining prominence through the 1800s, transforming from a relatively minor observance into the major celebration familiar today. Easter remains important for Christians, and various denominations mark their own significant dates. These holidays include church services, family gatherings, special foods, and suspension of ordinary work. Independence Day, July 4th, is perhaps the most distinctly American celebration, a day of patriotic commemoration that includes parades, speeches, fireworks, and community gathering. The national origin story is retold, heroes are honoured, and American identity is reinforced. The celebration is genuine. National pride runs deep in communities that remember or have heard stories of the Revolution and its sacrifices. Here's an interesting detail about holiday celebrations. They're often rowdier than we might expect. Christmas, before its Victorian domestication, sometimes involves drinking, mischief, and general revelry, rather than quiet family observation. Independence Day celebrations feature genuine gunfire alongside fireworks, and the combination of alcohol and explosives produces predictable casualties. The genteel celebrations familiar from later periods evolve from earlier, rougher traditions. Community events mark other transitions. Weddings gather families and friends for celebration of new unions. Funerals bring mourners together for grief and mutual support. Political gatherings, speeches, debates, election day festivities engage citizens in the ongoing drama of democratic self-governance. The calendar is punctuated by these collective occasions, each one providing a break from individual household routine. Seasonal transitions themselves carry meaning. Spring brings relief from winter's confinement. The first warm days invite outdoor activity and renewed energy. Summer's long days enable extended labour, but also evening socialisation when work finally ends. Fall carries urgency as harvest and preservation consume available time. Winter forces withdrawal into homes and close quarters, with celebrations providing relief from the darker months. Regional variations shape celebrations. In the south, traditions might differ from those in New England. German or Scandinavian communities bring their own observances. Rural and urban celebrations take different forms. This diversity reflects America's nature as a nation of many origins, with each group contributing its own patterns to the collective culture. The function of all these celebrations is partly entertainment, relief from monotony, pleasure for its own sake, but also social bonding. Communities that celebrate together know each other, trust each other, can rely on each other when need arises. The shared experiences create shared identity, distinguishing insiders from outsiders, creating the we that makes community possible. When you dance at the barn dance, help at the barn raising, or gather for the harvest festival, you're doing something beyond having fun. You're reinforcing the social fabric that makes your life viable. As you participate in this year's celebrations, whatever the season, whatever the occasion, you're enacting traditions that stretch back through generations. Your grandparents did something similar, as did their grandparents, and the continuity provides rootedness in time. The celebration is always both this moment and all the previous moments like it, connecting you to ancestors and eventually to descendants who will continue the patterns. And then there is death. In a world without modern medicine, where life expectancy hovers around 40 years, death is a familiar visitor, frequent, expected, mourned deeply, but processed through rituals that integrate loss into community life. How the 1800s handles death differs dramatically from modern practices, and understanding these differences reveals much about the era's relationship with mortality. Death typically happens at home. Hospitals are for the destitute. Respectable people die surrounded by family, in the beds where they've slept for years, in spaces saturated with personal meaning. The dying are attended by relatives who provide comfort, witness final moments, and ensure that passing happens with appropriate dignity. This intimate presence at death is considered both duty and privilege, a chance to offer love one final time and to receive whatever wisdom or blessing the dying might impart. When death comes, the body remains at home for a period of viewing, typically 2 to 3 days. The parlour, if the family has one, becomes the setting for the wake, where friends and neighbours gather to pay respects, offer condolences and spend time with the deceased. The body is washed and dressed by family members, usually women, who perform this final service with care and reverence. Ice might be used to slow decomposition in warm weather. Mirrors are covered, clocks are stopped. The wake serves multiple functions. It allows the community to process loss collectively, sharing memories of the deceased and supporting the bereaved. It provides time to ensure the person is truly dead. The fear of premature burial, while perhaps exaggerated in popular imagination, is real enough to influence practice, and it creates space for grief, a structured period when ordinary life is suspended and mourning takes precedence. Coffins are typically made locally by carpenters who turn to this work when needed. The coffin is simple, usually plain wood, shaped in the hexagonal toe pincher form that follows the body's outline. Elaborate caskets exist for the wealthy, but most people are buried in straightforward containers that serve their purpose without ornamentation. The coffin sits in the parlour during the wake, open for viewing, and family members take turns sitting with the body through the night. Funerals follow wakes, typically led by clergy who offer words of comfort, scripture reading, and theological interpretation of death's meaning. The service might happen at home, at church, or at the gravesite, depending on local custom and the family's preferences. Mourners gather, often in significant numbers for respected community members, and the collective presence demonstrates that death is a community matter, not merely a private family affair. Burial happens quickly. Preservation technology is limited, and bodies can't be kept indefinitely. The graveyard is usually associated with a church, and families are buried together in plots that accumulate generations of the same name. The grave is dug by hand, often by neighbours who volunteer for this service, and the lowering of the coffin is witnessed by mourners who may participate in filling the grave afterward. Here's something about 1800s mourning that seems strange to modern sensibilities. The rituals are elaborate and extended. Widows might wear black for years after their husband's death, following protocols that specify appropriate dress at different stages of mourning. Hair jewellery, ornaments incorporating the deceased's hair, serves as memorial and connection. Mourning stationery with black borders announces loss to correspondence. These practices might seem excessive, but they provide structure for grief, public acknowledgement of loss, and visible signs of a community in mourning. Historians still argue whether 1800s death practices were healthier than modern ones, more integrated, more honest, more supportive of genuine grieving, or whether they were morbid, obsessive, and psychologically harmful. The answer probably varies. Some mourners found comfort in rituals, while others felt oppressed by expectations. What's certain is that death was visible and processed communally in ways that modern practices tend to avoid. Children's deaths deserve particular mention, because they were so tragically common. Families might lose multiple children to disease, accident, or the simple fragility of young life, and grief was woven into the fabric of ordinary experience. Small graves mark churchyards, and the memorial photography that emerges during this era often captures deceased children, the only portrait the family will ever have of a child taken too soon. The ever-presence of death shapes life. You live knowing that any day could bring loss of spouse, child, parent, sibling, friend. This awareness creates urgency, appreciation for present moments, and perhaps a kind of toughness that modern comfort-seeking can barely comprehend. You've seen death, experienced it close, integrated it into your understanding of what life means. It's not morbid, it's realistic, and when your own time comes, you'll be processed through the same rituals that you've observed for others, becoming memory and ancestor in your turn. Something is changing, though. You can feel it in the air, hear it in conversations, sense it in the strange new technologies that are beginning to reach even rural areas. The world of candlelight and horsepower that has defined your existence is not permanent. Transformation is coming, signalled by inventions and discoveries that hint at futures you can barely imagine. The telegraph has already arrived in population centres, those mysterious wires strung on poles that somehow carry messages faster than any horse could run. You might not understand exactly how it works. Few people truly do. But you know it exists, that someone in New York can learn news from Washington almost instantly, that the pace of information is accelerating beyond anything previously possible. This alone seems magical, but it's just the beginning. Electricity is being explored by scientists and inventors, though its practical applications remain limited and experimental. You've perhaps heard of demonstrations where electric sparks are generated, where lights glow without flame, where mysterious forces animate machines. These seem like curiosities, parlour tricks for the educated and wealthy, not the foundation of a transformed world. But visionaries are working toward something more, toward harnessing this strange power for practical purposes. Photography has arrived, offering the ability to capture images with perfect fidelity. No artist's interpretation, no flattering portrait, just reality frozen in time. Getting photographed is still a special occasion, requiring travel to a studio and awkward posing while exposure happens. But the technology is improving, becoming more accessible, and the implications are revolutionary. Future generations will know what you actually looked like, not merely how you were described. The railroad is expanding rapidly, shrinking distances that once seemed vast. By mid-century, networks connect major cities. By century's end, transcontinental routes will span the continent. The railroad is already transforming commerce, enabling goods and people to move faster and farther than ever before. If you live near a rail line, you've experienced this acceleration directly. If not, you've heard about it, and the future seems to be moving in that direction. Factories are multiplying, producing goods that previously required artisan labour. The logic of industrial production, standardization, mechanization, efficiency, is spreading from textiles to machinery to an ever wider range of products. This transformation brings benefits, cheaper goods, new employment, and costs, displaced artisans, brutal working conditions, and the ultimate implications are still unfolding. Here's what you can't know, but what historians can observe. The world you inhabit is on the verge of the most profound transformation in human history. Within decades, electricity will light homes and power machines. Within generations, distances that take you days to cover will be crossed in hours. Communication will become instantaneous, information will become abundant, and the daily labour that consumes your life will be delegated to machines. But that future isn't here yet. You live in the present, where darkness still falls when the sun sets, and fire still demands constant tending. The changes coming are still mostly whispers, reports from distant places, demonstrations seen by the privileged few. Your daily life continues much as your grandparents did, shaped by the same rhythms of sun and season, the same technologies of fire and muscle that humans have used for centuries. The gap between present and future creates a peculiar moment in time. You're modern by any reasonable historical measure, literate, participating in democracy, connected to a wider world through mail and newspaper. But by future standards, you're ancient, living in ways that will seem primitive and strange to descendants who can't imagine life without electricity. This transitional moment is where you find yourself, and there's something both humbling and exciting about recognizing that change is coming, even if you can't see its full shape. The whispers of change might reach you through a travelling lecture, where demonstrations of electric phenomena draw curious crowds, or through a newspaper article about Edison or Bell, or any of the inventors working toward practical applications, or through rumour and gossip the way most information travels. You might dismiss these reports as fantasies, or embrace them as the future, or simply file them away as curiosities that don't affect your immediate life. What matters now is the here and now, the fire that needs feeding, the animals that need tending, the labour that needs doing. Tomorrow will take care of itself, and if transformation is coming, you'll adapt as you've always adapted, as humans always adapt, to whatever new circumstances arise. The darkness you live within is familiar, even comfortable. The light that's coming is unknown. The day is finally ending now. The sun slides below the horizon, painting the sky in colours that no electric light can replicate, and the familiar darkness begins its nightly return. You've made it through another day, another round of chores and meals and small victories and inevitable frustrations, another 24 hours in a life measured by the eternal rhythms of sun and fire. The animals are bedded down for the night, chickens secure in their coop against foxes, cows settled in their stalls, the horse comfortable with fresh hay. The fire in the hearth is banked for overnight, coals carefully buried under ash to survive until morning, when you'll coax them back to life and begin the whole cycle again. The water bucket is full, positioned near the fire to prevent freezing. Everything is as it should be. You sit for a moment by the dying firelight, too tired to sleep immediately, savouring the quiet that descends when the day's work is finally complete. The sounds of the house are peaceful. The creak of cooling timbers, the soft breathing of sleeping children, the occasional pop of the fire's embers. Outside an owl calls, hunting in the darkness that is its element as the daylight is yours. What have you accomplished today? The list seems endless and somehow also insufficient. Water hauled, animals fed, meals prepared, clothing mended, firewood split, 100 small tasks that will need doing again tomorrow. The work is never finished, never truly complete, just temporarily paused while darkness makes continuation impossible. This might seem dispiriting if you think about it wrong, but you've learned not to think about it that way. The work is life. Life is work, and the satisfaction of rest is earned through labour. The darkness outside is absolute now, unrelieved by any artificial light. The stars emerge in their thousands, their millions, a dome of light that your ancestors knew, and that your descendants will largely forget in the glare of cities. You can see the Milky Way when you step outside, that cloudy band of distant suns, and for a moment you feel the strangeness of your small existence on this vast planet, in this enormous universe. Then you go back inside, because philosophical contemplation doesn't keep you warm. Tomorrow the rooster will crow before dawn, and you'll wake in darkness and you'll begin again. The fire will need resurrection, the water will need hauling, the animals will need tending. Breakfast will be cornmeal and salt pork, and laundry day will come again, and the general store will need visiting, and letters will need writing. The cycle continues, season after season, year after year, until someday it doesn't. Until death interrupts the pattern as it eventually interrupts all patterns. But that's not tonight. Tonight you have warmth and shelter and food in your belly and people you love sleeping nearby. Tonight the darkness is peaceful rather than threatening, a blanket rather than an enemy. Tonight you can sink into your straw-tick mattress with its rope supports and let exhaustion carry you towards sleep. The fire crackles softly, its glow painting warm shadows on the walls. Somewhere a child murmurs in dreams. The world is vast and dark and full of mystery, but your small corner of it is secure. And now, as that fire dies slowly to embers, and the 1800s farmhouse fades into the gentlest darkness, you too can let go. Let the tension in your shoulders soften, the way it would after a day of honest labour. Let your breathing slow to match those steady coals, each breath longer than the last, each exhale releasing something you no longer need to carry. The sounds of that distant time grow quieter now. The owl falls silent, the timbers settle one final time, the fire releases its last whispers. You're drifting between worlds, between then and now, between waking and the sweetest kind of rest. The heaviness in your limbs is not exhaustion but surrender, the body's wise decision to let the day end completely. There is nothing left to do. The chores are finished, the animals are safe, the fire is banked and will keep until morning, whenever morning comes. You have earned this rest in ways that perhaps you'd forgotten. Earned it through presence, through attention, through making it to the end of another day in this improbable life. The darkness that seemed so foreign at the beginning of our journey is familiar now, almost friendly. It holds nothing to fear, only permission to release. Let your eyes stay closed. Let your thoughts scatter like embers cooling in ash. Let the last images of that simpler time, the well, the hearth, the endless sky, become the landscape of your dreams. You've travelled far tonight, through a world without switches or screens, where light was precious and darkness was honest. Carry that simplicity with you into sleep. You need nothing more than what you have in this moment: warmth, safety, rest. The candle is out, the story is told, the night receives you gently. Sweet dreams.